So this chapter is on concepts of governance and management, as I told you. The focus of this chapter is to clearly understand what is the meaning of governance and what is the meaning of management, and the concepts around it are, easy for us. Governance, as I told you, is always the directors. They steer. Management, as I told you, is the executive. They operate. Governance takes care of three things, which we call as EDM, which we will study in the next, or which will go through in the next few screens, which will evaluate, direct, monitor. Governance takes care of these three pillars. They will evaluate, direct, and monitor. So, which means in examination, this could be an MCQ question. Which of the following is not a critical function of governance? Anything other than evaluate, direct, and monitor, operate, if they use the word, or supply, support, all of those comes under management. It will not be a part of governance. Okay. Whenever you're answering questions in this particular chapter is concerned, think that your client is not the small kirana shop, but rather the largest listed company where ultimate corporate governance is actually in place. And think with that mindset and you will be able to answer this entire thing better. This chapter also focuses on risk management and few principles, which is also a repetition of the first chapter. So wherever it is there, I'll quickly throw some light and move on. And let me also remind you, towards, I think, the fourth or the fifth section of this chapter speaks about roles and responsibilities, which is very, very important, where practical examples, wherever possible, I will try to throw some light. Okay. So with that as a background, let me quickly get started. I'm not giving any introduction, etc., directly hitting the bullseye. See, governance is basically having, this entire chapter focus on four broad things. What is the meaning of governance? What is the meaning of governance of enterprise IT? Then you have what is called as corporate governance and a smaller bucket called internal controls. Okay, and these are the four domains which we should clearly be able to understand in this particular first section. So when I quickly go to the word, what is the meaning of enterprise governance? Or governance as such. Enterprise governance today broadly consists of two things. One, we call it as conformity. One is called as performity, or performance and conformance. When you focus on complying with the laws, regulations, rules, etc., my dear friends, you are focusing on corporate governance. When you are focusing, but you cannot just keep on following only the rule book and forget the business. You need to follow both the things parallelly. And when you look after the business, that is called as business governance, popularly called as performance. When you are looking into corporate governance and business governance, there is an element of accountability, assurance, value creation, resource utilization, and this is what is a broad focus. So enterprise governance focus on these things. Now, when I use the word accountability, a simple thing is, right from the top to the bottom, each person knows what he or she is supposed to do. If tomorrow there is a challenge or a trouble, they know how to approach it. In other words, it should not be a case where fingers are pointed at each other. And that is what is accountability. Second is assurance, where we say all the facts, other things being constant, that the transactions which have taken place in the company, in the organization, are legitimate. They are not fictitious. And obviously, you need to create a value to the stakeholder. At the same time, you need to ensure with limited resources, you are able to optimize it. So from an enterprise governance definition, it is a set of responsibility and practices, please note, exercised by the board and executive management. So the critical word over here is the board and executive management. And please note, it is more towards strategy and direction because it is the enterprise governance as a whole. Okay, ensuring that objectives are achieved, risks are managed, and organizations' resources are used responsibly. You'll find these three words everywhere. You have to achieve objectives, manage the risk, ensure resources are optimized. These are three words which you will find everywhere, and this itself is another MCQ question. Which of the following is not, or which of the following statements is true with respect to enterprise governance, and they give you. So as long as you have taken care of these objectives, risk, and resources, I think you have been able to answer that. Now, what is a corporate governance? Now, enterprise governance is very, very large, of which I told you corporate governance is one part of it. Because even the business conformity alone is restricted in corporate governance. The business performance is looking into a different term. So here, the focus is a system where a company or an enterprise is directed and controlled to increase the shareholder value, at the same time enhance the economic performance. It's a simple, straightforward statement. Your focus is only on the enterprise where the direction and control is what you are restricted. It could be good set of practices, it could be good set of policies, etc. And if you look from a typical auditor standpoint, corporate governance is all about defining rule book and ensuring that the rule book is followed. It is more of a compliance testing. If an auditor was supposed to verify a corporate governance, his focus is more on the compliance testing portion of it. Now, this corporate governance has got a few interesting portions. And the first is, of course, the board. In India, if you look into it, the corporate governance, the board, the listed company is just very, very clear. The rule is that majority, it depends on your it depends on your, CEO or managing director. If your CEO or managing director is, sorry, it depends on the chairman, beg your pardon. Chairman, if the chairman of the board of directors is an independent person or is not related to the promoter, then 1/3 of your directors should be independent directors. Whereas if the chairman of your particular organization or the listed company is a promoter or is an executive director, then 50% of the directors should be independent directors. That is a requirement in India. And it is obviously not possible for every organization to have professional management. For example, Infosys is today driven by professional CEOs. L&T entire group is run by professional CEOs. Correct? Whereas some other companies are still promoter driven, but they're still able to manage. It's not that they're not able to manage the show. So the board constitution is one critical element in corporate governance. It scales down to reporting. What is the reporting standard? Are there transparency in reporting? And that's why the board of directors reports become a critical thing. Then, is there the shareholders' rights which are safeguarded? Is there a cases of oppression, mismanagement? And most important, have there been cases of insider trading? And let me tell you, insider trading is one of the most difficult thing to catch hold for any person. No doubt SEBI asks for this question, that question, etc. But the real question is, how do I catch hold of these people? So insider trading is obviously a big challenge, and it should clearly demonstrate that my insiders should not trade during such period of sensitivity, and the law itself gives you a clear permission that you should give a trading plan much before in case your insiders have to trade. And the last is your risk management. And the risk management focuses on the pervasive audits the entire business. We call it as enterprise risk management, which is a critical requirement. Now you must be wondering, sir, all of these are great. Why is it relevant for us as Disa professionals? Please bear in mind, the moment we become an audit professional, we need to understand the governance aspect of IT, and this governance of aspect of IT comes within the corporate governance domain. So you have the enterprise domain, of which you have the corporate governance, then you have your IT governance or governance of enterprise IT. So what are a few good control practices? One of the examination asked question, which of the following indicate that there are good compliance practices within the organization? A few of them you can notice here. Segregation of incompatible functions. Let me tell you, with all due respect, even the largest of the listed companies have challenges in segregation of duties. Why? Because there could be some changes, the way in which the organization structure works, and the segregation of duties involves some amount of time. It's not that, I click a button and segregate the duties and go away. No doubt you can have a standardized checklist, but the operational parameter, you have to define it. See, if you look into larger companies, or if you look into a ERP, okay, let's look into an SAP ERP versus a Tally ERP. Tally ERP will work the way your organization wants. SAP ERP will work the way SAP wants. In other words, there are standardized things and processes defined in SAP. You have to follow that, and for that matter, even Oracle. You cannot go outside that. You can customize the format and content, but the process remains standardized. And that is why when organizations move from Tally sort of a setup, To any other ERP, it requires a drastic or something which is extraordinarily high set or high amount of migration and things. Elimination of conflict of interest. The interest, which is where two people are, we spoke about in yesterday's session, where related people or associate entities, etc., or auditor and the management, there could be some sort of conflict. You need to eliminate it. Audit committee is considered to be one of the most independent authority in our company, and they have so much of authority. Let me tell you, an audit committee member can literally walk in to the CFO's office and can demand certain things, and that is the power which is given to the audit committee. Risk management is also one very important thing. Compliance with the regulatory framework, and very important, recent days this has become very important, disclosure of your corporate governance practices, IT governance practices, your system governance practices, all of them become a critical thing. Quickly moving further, what are the regulatory requirements? The CEO and CFO is held responsible for maintaining the internal financial controls. In US, if the internal financial controls have been messed up or they have a challenge or a problem, the CEO, CFO are criminally held liable. I repeat, they are criminally held liable. In India, it is only a civil liability. Second, the CEO and CFO have to evaluate the effectiveness of internal controls with respect to the financial reporting. And this is a mandatory requirement as far as the large listed companies are concerned. Private limited companies also in India have this requirement with some amount of relaxations which have come in the last few years. And the CEO, CFO will say whether has there been any deficiencies in such a design, and it will also say the steps they have taken to mitigate it. So this becomes a sort of a visibility, and the law itself has said, hey, you are the CEO, I will hold you personally liable for these actions. Yeah, so whether these come from a statute, yes, they definitely come from a statute. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act in the case of US talks about these requirements, and in case of India, section 134, which is the roles and responsibilities of directors, director reporting. 129 talks about roles and responsibilities where these are covered. 134 talks about director reporting responsibilities, and 143 talks about auditor responsibilities. All these sections make a cross reference. So what are the few key questions which you should keep in mind whenever you have these things? From an IT governance standpoint, from a corporate governance standpoint, probably let's restrict it first to the corporate governance standpoint. How do suppliers of finance get managers to return some profit to them? So is there a question where I am able to determine a ROI on the investment? How do suppliers of finance make sure that the money is not stolen by using bad projects? Or how do suppliers of finance control the manager? This is basically how the shareholders control the management. On the IT governance piece, how do the board and the executive get the maximum value from IT? And please understand, gone are the days where you said IT is a support service. Today, IT is a backbone. Can you imagine a bank without IT? It is impossible. Correct? So IT is a board level agenda. So if you thought that only finance and accounts are board level agenda, even technology is heading into the board level agenda. How do board and executive management get some sort of a comfort that the project money is not invested in wrong projects? And how do the board and executive management have a control over the CIO and IT? Just to bring it to the context, to bring in India's perspective, every bank, every insurance company, market regulated SEBI, all these fellows have mandated that the board should consider cyber security policy or infrastructure IT policy or IT governance as a part of their board discussion and agenda. Okay. So what are a few things from a corporate governance conformance perspective? Yeah, as I told you, from a regulatory, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act in India, it is clause 49 of listed agreement SEBI. In addition, I also told you the Companies Act. Today, the clause listing agreement is replaced by LODR regulations. I repeat, LODR regulations, listing obligation disclosure requirement regulations. Okay, it covers various things like roles of the chairman, composition of board of directors, audit committee, control assurance, etc., etc. Now, from a performance angle, What am I looking at? Performance is very, very proactive in its approach. So it is more like a forward looking. It is like, can I enter into new models? To give an example, the company called as Reliance, they realize that gone are the days of oil economy. It's all about digital. And you would have seen the traction and the attention which the business achieved during the period of lockdown. Correct. They've got investments from all the large companies, Google, Microsoft. They have some sort of a commitment over there, and they're coming up with innovative technologies which are going to future run the business. Correct. So business has to be a forward looking, and you need to have strategy and value creation. With the same time, you need to give, or ensure that everything is within your risk appetite. Okay, you cannot go ahead. A classical example of exceeding your risk appetite is Lakshmi Vilas Bank. Just few days back, I'm sure most of you would have noticed that the amount of discussion that bank was. In one of the articles I was reading, that the bank was absolutely okay until they started lending to corporate borrowers. Large corporate borrowers, they said that we have to expand, we had to grow, because of which they said that we will go and give loans to the large corporate borrowers. And you name any of the large defaulted borrowers are their customers, unfortunately, or maybe it was planned, we do not know that. So because of this, there is an implication. Correct. So therefore you need to keep that in mind, whether my business performance is important, whether is it within my risk appetite, and does not lend itself as method where all the standards, enterprise goals, all of them are easily achievable, but you need to define processes for that. You also develop best practices, and this is monitored by your audit committee, which is very, very important. Of course, the conformance domain and performance domain is not monitored by anybody, but the board fully has to evaluate on a regular basis. Okay, so if you have to look from a diagrammatic description, you have the stakeholders need at the top. You have the drivers, which is your risk management, benefit realization, and optimization of resource, and therefore you get the value creation. This is an extract from this standard called as COBIT, COBIT, not COVID. I'm referring to COBIT. Okay, so COBIT, we have risk management, benefit realization, and resource optimization. These are the three key drivers, or the three key principles for any stakeholder to achieve. Moving a little further, what is an enterprise risk management? Now we understood corporate governance. Now we go a little next level. What is this enterprise risk management? Now here, it is a process again affected by the entities, board of directors, management, all the senior personnel. But for what? To identify potential events or risk and manage and ensure it is within the risk appetite so that I'm able to achieve my objectives. So you will find that the corporate governance is fairly larger, and within that comes your enterprise risk management. So in a typical ERM in an IT environment, again, an examination asks question, the focus is on what are the types of controls an enterprise should be having. What is the strategy for formulating the IT controls and security elements of it? Whether these IT controls are regularly reported, or is it a subset of your ERM strategy, are things which you have to look into it. For example, if let's say a large listed company is implementing an ERP. Now the question is whether these ERP risks are envisaged within the enterprise risk management. Now, recently, I was doing an audit for a few of these companies in the GCC region, and there we had to look in from an ERM standpoint. ERM that considered a lot of things from an overall risk perspective, but technology had limited weightage. And coincidentally, that company had exposure to the European and the US market. As a result of it, the problem was in the European and the US market, there were a lot of data privacy restrictions. And those were not factored by this organization, and we had to escalate it to the board. So you can imagine what is that level of involvement of IT, how it forms part of the ERM, and how it goes to the board. And you will not believe it, especially with this data privacy laws. In India, we are speaking about a possible data privacy law which may come up probably next, a codified data privacy law which may come up in next budget session. But as that is going on, okay, in Europe there is a law called as the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulations, the penalty over there can go as high as 4% of your global turnover. You heard me right, 4% of your global turnover. So whatever, if you're global, if you're assuming you are in Europe, you were operating with a small unit, and let's say even you made only 1 million euros, but globally you made about 100, or maybe about 10 billion euros, 4% of that is your penalty. So you can imagine the cost and the implications, and that is how severe these regulations can get. So what is it that is necessary to implement the right level of controls? You need to have a desire for greater openness in systems. At the same time, you need to ensure that you have strict controls, and you need to match or ensure you are able to meet both of them. Okay, from a typical layers perspective, we have the board of directors, which is obviously at the strategic level. Sorry for the coloring, it's a strategic level there. Then you have the management, which is the CEO, CFO, which is at the management level, and the operational level is the IT business management or the line managers. So please bear in mind that this is governance, this is the management. And in fact, this entire below this becomes the management. Now comes a very interesting question. How do I consider, a typical IT service provider, whether it's a strategic partner or it's just a service provider? Now, if you had considered that IT was a simple service provider, your focus is on the historical. You're focusing only on whether it is an expense. That's all. Beyond that, you're not looking into it. Whereas when you go into the IT as a strategic partner, you're focusing on business growth. You're focusing on driving the business. A simple example, consider your own CA firm. Were you able to do much better during this lockdown situation if you had the remote work from home solution? The answer is yes. And those CA firms who were not able to have this remote work from home solution, all of them had a challenge, all of them had a trouble. Correct? So this is basically the purpose. So this is how things are designed. So you need to understand that it is a strategic partner and you are able to get some sort of a returns out of it. But be that as it may, you also need to keep in mind uh, that these systems have to be open. When I use the word open, that means that you need to be adaptable for change. You should not be very strict or rigid. Say for example, you came up with a technology last year which will work only within the office premises of your organization, and it was heavily used, fantastic. But in this work from home situation, everybody requires that remote working option, correct? So therefore it becomes a utmost necessary. And at the same time, you cannot force everybody to go on remote working because there may be bandwidth issues, there may be constraints. I'm sure most of your colleagues would have told that, we have power failure, we are not able to connect, the internet problem, laptop battery drain, or a whole lot of these bunch of problems. So let's move on quickly to an IT governance. Now, IT governance is quite similar to that of a governance, but please look into it. It focuses on the IT only, whereas in the general governance is focused on the overall business. So evaluate, direct, and monitor only the IT, and the focus is on the IT assets. Okay, so that's what from a governance standpoint. So what are a few things? Again, an examination asked question. This is, I think, a Gartner research, which says that what are the good indicators of governance and bad indicators of IT governance. In the left hand side, you can see good IT governance, direct contribution to business unit or IT alignment, improvising, commitment, whole lot of these things. Bad could be wasting the money, resources crunch, lower CIO tenure, CIO keeps quitting, or there has been a change, poor IT, a lot of issues, whole lot of things like this. And unfortunately, IT always comes a little back step when it comes to, the remain when you're planning anything. So what are the dimensions of governance? So governance has got broadly two dimensions, as I told you, conformance and business performance. We already spoke about. So conformance is adhering to your rules, regulations, etc. And performance is profitability, efficiency, and various factors. Okay, so it's more like, you balancing this entire uh, things simultaneously. So IT governance is a system by which activities, the IT activities in an enterprise are directed and controlled to achieve the business objectives. So I think this is clear. So how does this typical IT governance work? The IT resources, there is an element of plan, organize, acquire, implement, deliver, support. For those of you who are aware, this is nothing but the Corbett principles or the Corbett broad headers. Okay, you have the plan, build, run, operate. Okay, we'll speak about that a little later. Risks are managed and benefits are realized. Reports are issued and you have a tracking. Okay, you know what is your return on investment, how much benefits are you able to make. The return in mostly in case of IT is increase in efficiency, increase in productivity, reduction in errors or reduction in liabilities. All of those could be the way in which returns are calculated. And of course, the activities, this is a regular repeating cycle. And then you have your governance of enterprise IT, which is again a subset of the entire corporate governance. And here the focus is to ensure that whether you have the structure in place or the processes in place to achieve the goals and objectives. Okay, and this is the 3 governance objectives. Please keep in mind: benefit realization, risk optimization, resource optimization. Again, a MCQ question, because these 3 are the most critical principles for any governance objective. You want to realize your benefits, you want to optimize your risk, and you want to optimize your resources. So it's more like a triangle. Then comes the last bucket when we spoke about, as far as the first section is concerned, internal controls. Now here, internal controls is again next level or a subset of ERM. Please understand the flow. We had the enterprise governance, then the corporate governance, then we had the ERM, and now comes the internal controls. Of course, within corporate governance, you have on one side IT governance, and you also have the ERM as well. So pertains to maintenance of records that reasonably accurate, provides some assurance that whatever transactions have taken place, whatever expenditure, income, whatever is recorded, they are all within the authorization limits, and that whatever has happened within the organization is absolutely fine. If you go back in company law, I think there was a case law, I'm not able to recollect which case law that is, which said that it's called as doctrine of internal management. I'm not sure if it was the Turkwind rule or something. It says whatever happened within the company is presumed to be in a valid and a legitimate manner. That means all approvals have been taken place. So it gives you a reasonable assurance regarding prevention of timely detection of unauthorized transaction, acquisition, use of IT resources, etc., which may have an impact on the financials. Now, again, as I mentioned this, who has the responsibility? The Sarbanes-Oxley Act says the CEO and the CFO are personally and criminally liable. In India, criminal liability is not there. And enterprise should ensure that you have a policy enforcement and a risk avoidance methodology driven by internal control. And this is the requirement of Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Section 302 says that quarterly management has to certify. 404 talks about management assertion. I would suggest you to remember these both sections. Not that because it may be practically used or question, on that angle, but I find this as an important principles for for a professional domain as well as from a practice angle. Okay, now then comes a very interesting bucket, which is the internal controls as per COSO, which is what is the next section which I'm going to, which talks about these 5 domains, and I'm going to touch upon them in the next few slides, so I will probably skip it here. Not to forget, the clause 49 talks about these requirements, senior management, ERM controls, etc. All of these are critical things. And what are the controls typically in an IT? The CEO, CFO will certify. There will be a committee to review the internal processes, and non-compliance could also result in delisting from the stock exchange. So this is just a definition of control. Policy, procedures, practices, we call this triple P and O, designed to provide a reasonable assurance that your business objectives are going to be achieved. Yeah, so the lesser the risks, okay, that is when you have lesser risk, when you have more controls. And when you have more controls, obviously the business value is going to increase over a point in time. So it's a sort of a triad where you need to manage the objectives, your risk, and the performance, whereas the controls is more like a ball which you have to juggle, because objectives give you the direction where you want to go. Risks say what can go wrong, and performance will say how do I measure whether have I achieved the objectives or not. And this is how a governance professional looks into it. And let me also tell you, I have seen many of the professionals getting into a larger senior positions where these principles of governance become very critical. Okay, so there's just a difference, and this could be again one examination question to distinguish, or to identify which of the elements cover on performance or conformance. Okay, where they can give you three options from one column and the fourth option from the other, or vice versa combinations. Okay, the scope in case of conformance is board, whereas in case of performance is the decision, the value creation. Whereas in conformity is standards and codes, performity is best practices tools. Auditability, it can be audited for compliances. For performance, it is not easily auditable, depends upon how well the company is performing, the share market, stock price, all of those reflect. Conformity, you have the audit committee, and for balance scorecard, you have something which is a critical document. I'll also see if I can show you a balance scorecard just as a template. Okay. So that brings us to the second section of as far as this chapter is concerned, which is the GRC framework. So let me quickly speak some part of it. Yeah, CEO, CFO roles comes under conformity or performance. It comes under both because typically the compliance officer of the company reports to the CFO normally, and therefore CFO is more on conformity. CEO is more on performity. That's how generally the perception is. Okay. The first framework which I want to spend some time is the COSO framework, which is the Committee on Sponsored Organizations, which is basically five institutions came together. I think the IIA, then we had the CPA, IMA, then the Institute of Internal Auditors. All these entities came together and they came up with a very good set of benchmark or a good set of practices for ensuring internal controls are in place. And this is what is popularly called as the COSO Cube. It has five broad principles, what you see on the front facing, which is the control environment, risk assessment, control activities, INC, and monitoring. And it focuses on each of them should be at various levels. It is focused on entity, it's focused on the division, operating unit, or each of the function. At the same time, on the topmost, you have a the header which says that it should be focused from an operation, reporting, and compliance perspective. That means you need to take care of all the angles. It's not just for the sake of you doing a tick mark based approach you do it, but it should be covered, omnipresent. So what are these five components is what we're going to spend some time. The first is the control environment. For every organization, you need to develop and maintain a control environment. Now, what is this? This is nothing but the tone from the top. Your non-disclosure agreements, your policies, SOPs, segregation of duties, whether there are some basic principles of how the internal audit works. Is there a process of governance? That entire thing is control environment. If you ask me at a large level, control environment is all about governance. Then comes your risk assessment. Do you have a process to identify and understand risk? The whole bucket of risk management comes under this. Okay, whether you have an element of risk assessment. Then the moment you have assessed risk, it obviously means that you need to have a control for it. So control activities means the activities which you have developed to manage and mitigate and reduce the risk. And the last is information and communication. This is, you have control, but have you educated your employees on that? Is that actually being implemented? So associated with, information and communication, informing everybody that this is how you have to do. This comes at the execution level. And last is monitoring. This is where the element of periodical checks and balances, regular audits, etc. come into picture. So these five principles are further divided into 17 broad headers are components are divided into 17 principles, which you'll find it in the next few slides. Okay, so control environment, demonstrate integrity and ethical values. This is where I told you the NDA, non-disclosure agreements, whether you have code of conduct, etc. How do I exercise responsibility? Is there overall governance? Am I overseeing my business and management? Establish a structure, authority, and responsibility. There is a segregation of duty, who reports to whom, etc. In fact, when I do COSO audits, these are the criteria for me. So I just develop a simple checklist based on this. Demonstrates commitment to competence. Whether I have competent resources, whether has there been, periodical changing of my employees, or their what is that, attrition is extremely high, all of those things. And enforces accountability. Do I keep, each person accountable, responsible for the activities? Then comes your risk assessment. Is there an process of identifying the risk? Is there a process of analyzing the risk? Is there a process of a fraud risk assessment? How these changes are factored? All of this comes under the risk assessment. Then comes your control activities. Select and develop the control activities. Select and develop the general controls over information technology. This is typically deployed through policies, procedures, etc. So that's whether you have the practical element. And then comes your INC, whether it uses the relevant information. Are you communicating internally, externally? Are you aware? Have you made employees aware of it? And then comes your monitoring. This is basically regular monitoring, and whether is there a process where you're able to collect feedback, see what is the implication, and is that again going back to the top and report it, and is there the cycle which keeps on getting repeated. Yeah, so these are the broad objectives of COSO, which we spoke about, which is on the top. Operational objective, which is more in specific to whether the industry objective, the management perspective, all these are operational related. Then you have your reporting objective, whether it's external or internal, whether I'm able to meet them, and not to forget, I have the compliance, regulatory requirements, etc. Okay, next comes COBIT 5. Which of course has been replaced by COBIT, or superseded by COBIT 2019. COBIT 5 still continues. COBIT 2019 is considered to be a slightly more upgraded version. But COBIT 2019 is not there in the syllabus, it's only COBIT 5. Now when you speak about COBIT 5, what is this? See, each and every standard had a particular perspective. The COSO focused only on internal controls. IT is a part of it. Whereas if you look into ISO 27001, which we'll cover a little later, it focuses only on security. It does not go beyond the security. So there was a need which was felt. Can I have one standard which gives me an overarching, an umbrella framework which covers governance as well as of management of IT? So COBIT stood for control objectives of business, information, and technology. So whatever was necessary from a IT perspective, whether it actually stood for. But over a point of time, COBIT, the abbreviation was no longer used. It just became COBIT 5. Today, they no longer use that abbreviation. And they said that we will come up with a best practices, which if anybody decides to adhere to COBIT 5, indirectly, they would be adhering to hundreds of standards which are followed in the IT setup. Whether you talk about ITIL, whether you talk about information security management, whether you talk about cloud security, whatever, or data privacy, whatever you can call it, I will ensure if I follow COBIT 5, you're compliant with that. So that is the beauty of this. And this is divided into 5 principles and 7 enablers, which is basically the building block of the entire COBIT framework. And here, of course, there's a clear distinction between the management and governance, which we spoke about a little earlier. Yeah, so these are just general need and purposes. I will not discuss this. You can go through that a little later. Integrating COBIT with other frameworks, this is what I told you. The framework, when they were designing it, they ensured that it is in harmony with all the related frameworks, whether it could be ERM, whether it could be governance, or it could be policies, procedures, standards, business plan, etc. And the beauty of COBIT is you can customize it as per requirement. And COBIT 5, there are specific guidance with respect to information security. With respect to information security, with respect to risk management, with respect to assurance. Okay, you can visit the ISACA website, and for your information, COBIT 5 is a freely available download. Anybody wants can download it. You just have to mention your name, your email ID, etc. Just register and you can easily download it. COBIT 5, which is available. It's called as COBIT 5 Toolkit. You can probably go and look it up. You'll get it. You'll get now COBIT 2019 Toolkit also, which is available as a free download. Of course, these publications are ISACA publications, which is a paid versions. The 5 principles of COBIT. Principle number 1, meeting the stakeholder need. Whatever you do, understand the stakeholder. Stakeholder can be internal, external. Example, internal stakeholder, employees. Employees, you want to ensure access is adequate enough. External stakeholder, customers, you want to deliver quality product and services. Second, covers the enterprise end to end. It doesn't focus only on IT development. It doesn't focus only on IT disposal. It doesn't focus only on IT programming. It covers the entire IT function. So covers the entire enterprise end. The third, you need not adhere multiple frameworks. You adhere to common. This is more than sufficient. So you can imagine how huge and how exhaustive this standard could be. And enable a holistic approach. When you enable a holistic approach, let me tell you, you can get a overall bird's eye view from just this one standard. And probably I'll just show you how the standard also looks so that you get an idea. And separation from the governance from management. This is a very critical and important principle. And this is how the relationship between the various activities within Corbett is. You have the stakeholders who delegate it to the governing body, which is nothing but the board of directors. Board of directors in turn delegated to the management. Management in turn delegated to the operation and execution, whereas each of them report to the previous version. So please look at the choice of the words also very critical. Operations and execution, they only report to the management, whereas management, from a governing body monitors the management, whereas the governing body is ultimately held accountable if something goes wrong. Difference between accountable and monitoring. Monitoring is just overseeing if something all fine. Accountable is ultimately then answerable. Please keep in mind, accountable and responsible are different. If there is a car accident by a travel agency, the owner of the travel agency is accountable. The car driver is responsible. So you're getting the difference. Okay, and this is where I told you there's a distinction between governance and management. The governance principle is evaluate, direct, and monitor, EDM, and bottom is your management, which is your plan, build, run, monitor. Under plan, you have APO, align, plan, and I think it's APO, align, plan, and objective or something like that, or operate, sorry. Then you have your build, uh, um, build stage, and then you have your run stage, and then you have your monitor stage. So PBRM is what we popularly refer. So governance is all focused on EDM. If you notice on the top, evaluate, direct, and monitor. And if you focus on the management, you have the plan, build, run, and monitor. And then you also have these 7 enablers of Corbett. And when you use the word 7 enablers of Corbett, my dear friends, this is very, very critical, because these are the 7 factors which help you to do much better. And these enablers are principal policies and framework. They ensure, or they predominantly assist you to achieve your goals and objectives. You need to have processes for that. You need to have an organization structure for it. You need to have culture, ethics and behaviors. Then you need to have information, which is nothing but the data. Then you need to have the technology, which is your infrastructure applications. And last is your people, skill, and competencies. So these 7 enablers, coupled with 5 principles, act as a holistic guide. Okay, so let me also see if I can quickly show to you how this sort of standard looks like, more from a practical guidance perspective. So just give me a minute. Okay, here you go. So here is this sheet, of course, this Corbett 2019. Okay, now here, if you notice, we spoke about their objectives. They have 40 objectives. Now this 40 objectives is nothing but, if you go here and go through it, this is all about the 5 stages which we spoke about. Remember, we spoke about a few things. EDM, this is governance. Then you have plan, align, plan, and organize, APO. Then you have build, acquire, and implement. Then you have deliver, this is run, DSS, deliver, service, and support. And then you have monitor, evaluate, and assess. So this basically, my dear friends, is what they have sort of covered over here, what you notice in this particular screen. So if you are more from a governance domain. If you want to decide what is your roles and objectives from a governance domain, all that you need to do is filter the domain over here for governance. And this is how simple it is. Okay. And in the domain of governance, there are 5 broad subdomains. Okay. Okay. Evaluate, direct, and monitor. And what is the objective? Each of them have as an objective. For example, if your objective was, how do you ensure that there is a governance framework? Or how do you ensure that the benefits are getting delivered? How do you ensure that the risk is getting optimized? How do you ensure that the resources are optimized? Or how do you get the stakeholder engagement? Now let's presume you want to focus more on the EDM03, which is risk optimization. You then what you do, you go to the next sheet, which is called objectives and practices. Now what this objective and practices does is, it goes to the next version. If you have to do a risk optimization, what is it that I have to take about? So for that, I need to go here and pick up the relevant standard number. What is the EDM03 is the number. So I come on to this particular sheet. I hope you're able to see my Excel sheet. In this, I come down to EDM03. Okay, so EDM03. And the moment I pick this, I know if I have to achieve ensured risk optimization, these are the functions which I need to focus on. Sorry. EDM03, I think it doesn't repeat. Let me. Okay, risk optimization. What is the objective? Ensure that the enterprise risk and appetite are understood, articulated. Now here, if I go, they have further about 3 practice IDs. And what is this? Evaluate risk, direct risk, monitor risk. Now, how do I evaluate, direct, and monitor risk? What is it that I need to do if I have to achieve that? For that, all you do is go here to the next sheet, which is your objectives to activities mapping. So I go click on EDM03, and here it is. If you are evaluating risk, which is the first step, what is it that you need to do? Here are your 7 steps. Understand the organization and its context, determine the risk appetite, determine the risk tolerance level, determine the alignment, proactively evaluate, evaluate risk management, attract and maintain necessary skills. There you go. Now let us say you want to direct risk management. That means how do you have the direction as such? So here you have about 5 points. So my dear friends, this becomes a simple checklist or a simple activities which you need to do to achieve that. Now, assuming, sir, this is too much of a navigation, you want to have a combined, you can just put a simple VLOOKUP, which I have done it and kept it because I use it for my audit purposes. So I just put it over here, and all that I do is I don't even go by the rule book. I just say that I want to evaluate something on risk. So I just come over here and I just go and search here for the word RISK. You notice that? Ensure risk optimization, manage risk. So I just click on this. Now let us say I want to do something to do with vendors. I just go click on vendors. So this is my ready-made vendor checklist, 29 points. And then I just check whether these 29 points are taken care and I close the audit. Correct. So this gives a visibility. I mean, there's a one simple and a hack way in which you can use it. So that is how quickly this is possible. This COVID 2019 sheet is available from the ISACA website. You can download it from there. It's available for everybody. It's not that it's restricted only to 1 or 2 people. Anybody can download. You have to just register and use it. Of course, the guidance notes, etc. You have to pay the required fee and you can do it. Just go to ISACA website and search for it. You can get it. The sheet with VLOOKUP is nothing but a copy paste. You can just do it on your own. Okay. Quickly moving further. You have the another standard, which is your ISO 38500. Remember the standard number because they may ask you a question: which of the following standards covers the governance of IT of the governance of IT for the organization? They can give you 3-4 standard numbers, so the answer will be 38500. So for that purpose, remember it. Again, you will notice here EDM concept: evaluate, direct, and monitor. Okay, so there's another standard. We need not go too much into it because COVID already encompasses the best practices, including 38500. Then you have a 31000, which is basically a risk management standard, a very good standard, recommended for you to read it because it talks about the entire way in which a risk should be identified, risk appetite, all of those. Of course, some part of it we are going to cover in the subsequent section. And this has ensured that, IT risk governance has added as a part of your risk committee. So it's more detailed chapter which you're going to cover in the subsequent sections. Okay, now we are moving to the third part, which is your enterprise risk management and IT risk management, which I just told you, the third section. Now here we try to understand what is risk management, and we already have understood what is enterprise risk. So I'm not going to repeat all of this. You can do that bit of reading. But in general parlance, if I have to talk about risk management, has got broadly two pillars: enterprise risk management, of which IT risk management is one major component. Because today we realize that the involvement of IT is significantly increasing. If you remember, I showed you an image yesterday. Of course, here we have a slightly different image. Enterprise risk has business risk, market risk, operational, strategic. Okay, but across all of them, there is an element of IT. That is the meaning of this. Whether it's business or strategy, you have IT risk. Whether it's market or competition, you have IT risk. Whether you have operation, it's called IT risk. And in fact, now this IT risk has been further bifurcated, and they today call it as I&T risk: information and technology risk. So this I&T risk, as I told you, my dear friends, is a increasing domain, because today we realize information has unique risks, technology has unique risks. So both of them are segregated. Okay. Now from a COVID perspective, also you have the risk management, which is that EDM03, which I just showed it to you some time back, which focus on the risk optimization, what you can do, what you cannot do, etc. I covered that. And as I told you, EDM is the core business activity of a risk management: evaluation risk management, direct risk management, and monitoring. This is a very interesting step for you to understand a risk management process. You can probably write this in your audit reports or your risk policy, etc. First is collection of the data. You need to identify, collect the relevant information. What is the risk, what is the parameters, etc. Then you start analyzing them. What is the impact, etc. Now, an example could be, nobody presumed, and none of the risk registers in the world, invisible virus was an attack. Computer virus was an attack, correct? But an invisible virus such as COVID, nobody thought it could impact them. But today, everybody is impacted, correct? So you need to collect the data, you need to analyze that. And then, very important, you maintain a risk profile. Now, what is the meaning of a risk profile? A background, a perspective of how this risk works. When does it get materialized? When does it happen? It is more like, if you go to this, if you've seen these movies, every police department maintains one central registry of all the criminals. So it's more like that. Maintain a risk profile. When this will happen, when what will happen. Then articulate it. Can I put in some controls? Can I try to reduce the exposure? Is there an opportunity for me to improvise? And then you define a risk management action portfolio, where you try to see whether how this is fitting in within your risk appetite, whether it's acceptable, not acceptable. And last, you respond to that risk. In a timely manner, you respond to it, or in some cases, you just remain silent. Few matrices of how do you measure that risk management. This can be also referred to as KPIs or KRAs, key risk indicators, KRAs, sorry, key risk indicators. Percentage of critical business activities, IT services, business programs which are covered by risk assessment, number of IT related incidents. Incident could be any breach, any vulnerability, any virus attack, any problem, etc. Percentage of enterprise risk assessment, including IT risk. Frequency of updating the risk profile based on the status. So all these are critical matrices. Yeah, and these 5 are your risk strategies. Tolerate or accept the risk, where you say, okay, fine, I will accept it because it is, very small for me. Eliminate the risk is where I try to do some activity whereby I eliminate it completely. Transfer or share the risk is outsourcing or giving it to somebody else, cloud, etc. Mitigate the risk is where something which I do. Please keep in mind, eliminate the risk and mitigate the risk are different. Eliminate is you decide to remove the risk altogether. You just ignore that path. Mitigate the risk is you put in some controls. Turn back is you don't bother to do anything because it is very, very minor. Say, for example, flood possibility in a place like Dubai, or a flood possibility in a place like somewhere in the Gulf. Very, very remote. I'm not so very such an expert from a geographic or that particular reason or that particular location perspective, but I'm just trying to give you a thought process where it could have a very, very remote implication. Yeah, when you're developing a risk management, you focus on the risk, you also focus on the culture, the management style, and the control environment. This is more of general GAN only, which may not be relevant here. As I told you, the critical principles is what I'm going to look into. Yeah, turn back and accept the risk. Both of them are quite similar. But what happens in the case of accept is you understand the value proposition. You understand that it may have a minor loss, okay, or insignificant loss, I would probably call it. Whereas in turn back, it is, you're least bothered because the probability of that risk itself is extremely remote. In case of a turn back, you know that, hey, it really doesn't matter, forget it. I don't think that's going to happen. Correct? So that is going to be a turn back scenario. Whereas an accept the risk, you know it is going to happen, but even if it happens, you believe that the what you're going to lose out is very, very small, very, very minuscule. So therefore you go ahead and accept the risk. An example of accept the risk is marriage. You know what is the issues, but still you go ahead and accept the risk. Whereas turn back is like, you're least bothered, and it's more like kids at the teenagers where the parents keep on telling something and you're like, on the fun side of it. No offense to anyone against. Okay, risk register and control catalog. There's a very important document which maintains the list of what are the types of risks. Okay, the likelihood, the assets impacted, what is the overall implication, owner, risk response, reference to control. So this becomes your entire Excel spreadsheet. If you remember, I already told you, you can download this internal control financial guide by our own ICI. You will have this entire risk register, which you can notice this, where it covers all of these things in fairly bit of detail. I'm not sure if I have a risk register document, but let me see if I can show you something. But this basically gives you a thorough perspective of how a risk register looks like. Just give me a minute. Yeah. So let me quickly share my screen. This is one sample risk register where we speak about a domain, a process area, what is the risk, who is the risk owner, what is the criticality, you can say high, medium, low. Then you also define likelihood and impact. The product of likelihood and impact is risk score. And then you can say what is the level, high, low, medium. Correct? I hope you're able to see this Excel spreadsheet. Yeah. Then you also have what is the treatment you want to mitigate or you want to tolerate, whatever it is. And you can have types of treatment, what is the control. And then you can do your post treatment. What is the date, what is the implication and things like this. So this basically is one simple risk register. You can complicate it with more fields and more combinations, etc. Okay, so you need to update this regularly, and obviously this has to be approved by the management. Again, these are terminologies which I'll quickly brief you. Risk appetite is the ability and the extent to which they can sort of sustain the losses. Risk tolerate is more a limit up to which they can tolerate. So it's more like, if in case any risk materializes, the organization might recover within this particular bucket. Okay, so risk appetite and tolerate slightly work on two different, probably two faces of the same coin. Then you have all of these process. Risk identification. I think I told you, you need to evaluate the risk, prioritize, because not every risk you may want to address it immediately. Most of the corporate companies are focusing on work from home risk today. Correct? How do I sort of prioritize that? The risk response, mitigation, and monitoring. So all these are typical steps involved. Yeah, how do you identify risk? This is a very interesting thing. Generally what happens is a brainstorming or a workshop is basically conducted where you identify the list of risks and you can sort of use this. Many times I've used that COVID 2019 or COVID 2005, sorry, COVID 5 to make various types of assess the various risks. So it gives a good sort of document. Now obviously you need to review that particular risk which is identified. Then you also maintain the threat or profile inventory. Now, what is the threat or profile inventory? What are the types of threat? It could be fire, humidity, temperature. External threat could be virus, denial of service, etc. Internal threats could be, employee misuse. Natural threats could be earthquake, floods. What is this? Recent cyclone. Naivar, right? The Naivar is the latest cyclone which is impacting the southern part of India. So all of this could be the threat profile. Then you do what is called a vulnerability assessment. A vulnerability assessment is identifying the weaknesses in the system. Okay, and this is typically an evaluation to identify what are the gaps, what is the issue. It could be patch, it could be network, it could be server, any they're not meeting the required criteria. And here, what do? You catalog your assets and resources, like how I showed you. You define the various assets, resources, and then you also focus on what is the quantifiable value or the weightage, and then you identify the vulnerabilities for each of them. You have an asset inventory, the list of IT assets. For example, in case of a bank, if one ATM fails, as well as the branch also fails, then it could be a huge repercussion. If one ATM alone fails, they obviously can go to another ATM, but if the branch itself fails, it's obviously much more difficult. So you need to identify the risk of IT assets which you maintain. Then this is nothing but the risk register components. If you remember, risk scenario, threat, vulnerability, probability, impact. Then what is your treatment or your response, the control, mitigation, and inherent risk. I showed you through that spreadsheet itself. Then you also have risk components, residual risk, risk left over after you have applied the controls, risk aggregation, you aggregate all of these outstanding risk. You prefer a risk profile, heat map. Heat map is something which I'll just show it to you. Risk register, I think I showed you. And risk owner is just identifying or assigning some person responsible. Okay, how do you evaluate the risk? You can do it quantitative as well as qualitative. Quantitative is basically the expressing total risk in monetary terms. Qualitative is basically high, medium, low, etc., which I just showed it to you. Okay, and you also have likelihood of the risk. Consider your past experience, consider similar cases, consider the vulnerability, etc. You can determine the likelihood. Yeah, this is called as a heat map. This is called as a heat map. If you remember, I showed you in that my risk register also, where you have 1 to 5, which is the likelihood, and consequence 1 to 5. A product of this would typically come here. Anything more than 15 could be extreme high risk. 10, 12 range could probably be low risk. Or if it is midway through, it's moderate risk, and this is extremely least risk. So this is how a risk prioritization typically gets made. And this we popularly called as a heat map. Yeah. And then comes your risk response. I think we spoke about this: avoid, accept, transfer, mitigate. You'll notice that many places in your material things are repeated, so don't bother. Once you've got the concept, just keep on moving. Okay, then comes your risk mitigation. You define the controls to reduce the likelihood. Controls are typically selected based on your cost and benefit analysis. Your cost is compared to the total impact. And if there is any sort of a positive difference, it is implemented. If it's a negative difference, you don't implement it. It's basically a cost benefit analysis. Let's say the cost of implementing the control is 100. The risk of not implementing the control is 70, correct? That means you are actually spending more 30 rupees for implementing the control. But if the risk is 150 and the cost is just 100, you're getting a benefit. Okay, and this is again quite similar. I think we already covered this chart. Then comes your risk monitoring, periodic review. It's not sufficient if you make one risk register and keep it permanently. You need to periodically review it. In fact, for when I did audits for a few of these companies outside India, we had to strictly go by the risk manual. They have a risk manual itself, and that risk manual is drawn from ISO 31001. ISO 31001 is drawn from the New Zealand ISO risk management standards. You can search New Zealand risk management standards. That's a very good document for you to professionally go through. Those of you who are into internal audit, it's a good exercise. Yeah. So you can review the risk associated. You can see what is the change in terms of the newer risks. For example, if you are auditing now, is work from home risk added in the risk register? Okay, then we have something called BYOD, because many of them working from home, they've asked their employees to use their own resources. So is BYOD risk considered? So like that, newer risks will definitely come in. Then comes your IT risks and risk management. There are multiple changes in the IT and operating environment. The regulatory environment is changing. So a whole lot of these entire bucket is constantly evolving. so I'm not spending on summary. Let me quickly go to the next section, which is GEIT and GRC. Got a bad cold, so please excuse me. Yeah, this is a very small section. I'll quickly run through it. It doesn't involve too much of time. Um, I've not done too much of customization of slides as well, unlike the previous section. So enterprise today required to comply with lot of regulations, whether it is tax, whether it is governance, whether it's regulation. And today we are all using technology to drive it. A simple example, your own office, you may have hundreds of clients. How do I track each of the client, whether on the 20th or 22nd, my GST return is filed or not? You require trackers, you require Excel spreadsheets, you require technology, correct? So what is the GRC? GRC stands for governance, risk, and compliance. So G is basically a system where process, it's more to do the governance, direction, and control. Compliance is adhering to the laws. And of course, risk, we already spoke about it. Okay, so these are all terminologies which you'll find it repeated everywhere. So again, if you focus on, if you go through the first chapter, that's more than sufficient. The third chapter is the fourth chapter, fourth chapter, correct, which focus on this GRC and other things. You'll find it a little repetition. What is the risk? What is the framework? What is the control? What is clause 49? CEO, CFO certifications, I think we spoke about. Internal control process, what is it? Objectives. I'm just trying to give you the broad headers because we have already covered all of this. And there's also to tell you that, some redundant portion is there, which you can probably read it once and you can remember it. You also speak about what is IT compliance review, effective implementation of ERM, such as, end-to-end, top-down approach, best practices, technology deployment, all these things comes within your IT compliance review. This could be an MCQ question. Then you have the requirements of SOX. In India, clause 49, I think I already spoke about this. This is a general characteristics of risk, MCQ question. What are the characteristics of risk? A loss potential, uncertainty, probability, likelihood, correct? Then from a risk management angle, every entity should have the risk, to ensure that the risk is managed within the appetite. This is a very nice diagram which talks about the risk management cycle. I think we covered it also in the previous section. Your risk assessment is covered in the first two areas, whereas the remaining is a cycle, it's a continuous approach. Yeah, when you identify classified assets, valuation of information, identifying the potential threat, risk assessment, impact analysis. So this way you will get a better idea. Going back to my spreadsheet, because this will give you a very good way in which you can look into it. Say for example, you're looking into various domains. I've written a few domains over here. It talks about IT management, IT security. Okay, and here you have a sub process. Let's say I'm talking about a process relating to access control. Okay, so what is the risk? The risk is that we don't have any access control in place or abuse of system access. The criticality is high because based on the confidentiality, integrity, availability, I feel that. But I know as a matter of fact, the likelihood is very minimal based on my past experience in this particular organization. And the impact score is high because if this goes wrong, this has an implication. So product of these both, this comes under medium. Okay, and then what do? Either I mitigate, sometimes even I might accept, I can follow any of those things. And then type of treatment, I may have a policy. What is a policy? I have an access control policy, access to network, you have non-disclosure agreements, a whole lot of things. And then after I've given this treatment, what is the impact of it? Post treatment, the likelihood is reduced, post treatment impact is also reduced, and therefore I have this sort of a document. So this way I can get a quick view or a perspective on where I stand and how it's going on. Okay, so likelihood and the impact analysis. And I think we already spoke about the risk awareness. So if you notice, this is a more like a repetition, this entire section. You can probably, try to avoid it. I'm just trying to see if anything which is more critical, which is important, we'll cover that. Yeah, this is a good document. Where do I use COBIT 5? What are the best practices? You can use it for defining GRC. You can use it for defining or identifying the regulatory and compliance landscape. You can review the current GRC. You can do a gap assessment. So if you know companies where they want to improvise, there are some people who are seriously, genuinely interested in improvising, correct? So you can do a benchmarking study. I happened to do a benchmarking study for a couple of corporates where I did an assessment of what they are following versus what is there in the system. So it's a good way in which you can actually learn interesting things. Setting out key parameters, using a process-oriented approach. So I make it a policy that whatever I communicate during classes, directly or indirectly, somehow I will ensure I will implement it for a client. Of course, returns may be minimal, sometimes no returns at all, but at least it gives me a good use case for me to explain and practically see how this goes. Okay, so that's as far as this section is concerned. Then the next section focus on the environment and other things. Again, this is also a small section. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but what are the factors which to be considered? Your ethics and cultures of the organization is very, very critical, followed by laws and regulations, your policies, your applicable standards, industry practices, competitive environment. Let's talk about GST as an example. The ethics, there should be a policy where I don't take fake credit. That could be simple ethics. Then the laws and regulation. What law I'm following, what regulations are there. It could be GST law, GST rules, some other related rules. Applicable standards, there may be some industry standard, industry practice, etc. When you're implementing governance of enterprise IT, you focus on mission, the culture, management style, the roles and responsibilities, etc. And you also focus on the 7 enablers of COBIT. In case you remember that, he's covered that a little in detail. The first one is policy as a framework. We spoke about this. Then comes your processes. Process is nothing but guidance. It gives you a clear architecture or a clear roadmap on how you have to go, where you have to go. Then comes your governance and management. I told you clear distinction between what is governance, what is management. Okay, governance domain consists of 5 governance processes. If you remember, I just spoke about those 5 processes. Okay, and then management has those 4: PBRM, plan, build, run, monitor. Okay, so then you have what is called as a Raki chart. I'm not sure if you have seen a Raki chart. Let me show you how it looks like. Raki chart is nothing but identifying the various tasks and deciding who is going to be responsible for each of them. It's a very nice chart which can give you a simple structure, and it can say who is to do what. Okay, let me see if I can quickly show you one sample. Yeah, so this is a very simple sample which I'm sort of sharing it, where you can see an example of a Raki chart. So design the site. Project manager is C, strategist is R, designer is A, front end design. So R, what is CARI or RACI? Responsible. He is the fellow who has to do. Who is that person? The strategist. Okay. Who is accountable if something goes wrong? The designer, because the strategist may be reporting to the designer, or whatever is the situation. Okay, and then consulted is basically wherever I have a question or a query, I will sort of consult this person. And informed is because I'm doing something which may impact these guys, I have to keep them informed. Okay, so this way you can achieve some sort of a standardization. And there are a lot of Raki charts which are available in the public domain. You can just probably consider using them. Then comes your organization structure. Okay, let me also reiterate, this is all extension of COBIT 5. Whatever you're seeing here, the 7 principles is what we are discussing in detail. Organization structure is basically the span of control. Today, organization structure is also called as organogram. That's a nomenclature which is also referred for organization structure. You have what is called span of control, the boundaries of the organization structure within which you have to take a decision. That's the span of control. Then you have a level of authority. This is the level of authority that, where you are permitted to take some action, etc. Delegation of responsibility. Who can do what? Should only the senior management do everything? What is the level? And this is called as a delegation of responsibilities, delegation of power, DOP they call it. Especially in public sector, this becomes a very, very important document. And escalation procedures. There's one simple slide to give you a difference between governance and management. At one holistic view, you get an entire difference. What governance deals with, what management deals with. Yeah. Now comes the various roles and responsibilities, and let me spend a little time here because there's an examination question. What we covered until now were all, just more of concepts and general gyan, whereas now this is an examination committee, examination question rather. Sorry, strategy committee. Now, IT strategy committee is basically the moment you use this word committee, first and foremost, committee means a representative of board of directors should be there. Some representative of the board of directors. And here, the focus of the strategy committee is to decide which of the strategy members, which of those person would form part of this entire organization setup. Okay, so that's the strategy committee focusing. I would be giving a break a little later, maybe another 15-20 minutes or maximum of 30 minutes, because I'll get done with this chapter and then we can move to the next chapter. Okay, coming back. The IT strategy committee, as I told you, is focused purely on what is my IT strategy for the future. It could be acquisition, it could be managing business, it could be deployment of software, deployment of new technology, moving or adopting artificial intelligence, using blockchain, cloud computing, whatever it is. This is their focus. Okay. Then you have steering committee. Very important examination question. Steering committee focus on long-term and short-term objectives. This comes one level below the strategy. Now, it is this committee who decides what should be my long-term and what should be my short-term. They are the persons who decide what should be my priority. I have hundreds of projects. Which is my priority? This is the committee who decides. And this will establish the size, the scope of IT function, priorities, etc. So they're very, very specific and they steer the ship. Of course, they look into budgets, plans, etc. Please be very, very careful in reading through the roles and responsibilities of these committees because these are all examination asked questions. Okay. Next, roles and responsibilities and risks of IT department, CIO. CIO is the topmost position in any IT department. And normally you can't expect that every organization will have a CIO. Wherever technology is a predominant focus, they have the CIO. Okay, where technology is just doing a support services, they may not have a CIO, they may just have head of IT. That's all. So the risk of a CIO is that there is a gap between top management and the business requirements. So therefore, unrestricted access should be given to. What are the controls? Regular interface with board of directors. There should be regular documenting of work. Access should be granted on a need-to-know basis. All those things are the general controls. Then you have application system development manager. Now, system development managers are those who manage the application systems. They decide whether to, designing, developing, maintaining, all of them comes within their domain. Let's take an example. A company like, let us say, Tata's or the Batas or whatever, they have an IT infrastructure. I'm not talking about TCS. I'm just talking about a normal manufacturing. They may have SAP or Oracle or NetSuite, etc. Now they want to implement, modify, change certain things. How do they do that? That is where this focuses. Okay. Now again, they speak about what is the risk for that role, etc. All those things. Then system analyst. Now system analyst is a guy who understands the system requirements in detail. Now he is a gap between the left hand and the right hand, meaning the left hand is the user, the right hand is the developer. How do I try to bridge the gap between both? So therefore, this is the guy who actually helps you out with that. Then you have application system program. This is more on the programmer. He is a guy who actually sits and programs. Please bear in mind, he should have access only in the development environment. Maybe little bit test environment. Should not go beyond that. Production environment, he should never have access. Even if you have access, he should have only read only access. Then you have the data administrator. He is the overall in charge of the data. He decides the validation, he decides the rules, he decides what is called as a schema. What is a schema? I'm sure most of you, when you file the income tax return, you would have keep on getting one alert. The schema is getting updated. Basically, whatever is the form content, how each of them has to be defined, etc. So he also defines the retirement policy, what is called as retention period, archival, etc. Then you have database administrator. Now this guy defines and manages the entire data set, whereas a data administrator can look into physical as well as digital data, whereas database administrator focus only on a database. Okay, please bear in mind, a data administrator role is much broader compared to a DBA. A DBA is very focused. For example, a DBA of an SAP will focus only on SAP, will not go beyond that. Whereas if you have physical files which comes in, some email attachment, some KYC document, maybe the DBA may not be in charge of it, some other person may be in charge. Each application will have a separate DBA. Again, keep that in mind. Okay, so they specify how the data is, specify the physical data definition, database available to users, service, integrity of the database. All these are the functions of DBA. Okay. He also focuses on security of the data, integrity of the data, very critical. What is integrity of the data? Something stored in the database, it should remain as it is. It should not get distorted. You saved it as 325, it should not become 125 later. QA, quality management, just to formulate goals, implement standards, etc. Then you have the quality assurance. This is more like an audit, assuring that, whether the quality is being followed, etc. Then you have the security management, popularly broadly referred to as the CISO function. But here the focus is on whether when they do the program, whether the program is fairly safe, or can somebody, write something into the program and sort of, break open into it. An example is, it's a bank. He's designed an internet login system. Now, if you go to the internet login system, only an authorized username and password should come in. Let's presume he puts in admin and he gets the access. Correct? Who will block the admin account? So that should be the role of security management. Most of your Wi-Fi routers at home, you visit 192.168.1.1, enter admin, you can break it. Correct? So therefore, please always change the default Wi-Fi router password configuration. Okay. Then as a security manager, he's a guy who is actually enforcing it, who will monitor the breaches, who will periodically configure the rules, etc. Then is your technical support. This is more like a service desk. You can have various types of people: system analyst, system programmer, system administrator. Now all these fellows are all providing some sort of a technical support. So we look into each of these roles. Analyst, again, we already read the role of an analyst. He's more from understanding the requirements from left hand side and communicating it to right hand side. System administrator, very important, very, very important. I already explained this. Creation and deletion of user accounts. So he is the guy whose account, if it is compromised, is highly risky. So they can ask you a question: which of the following users, if their account is compromised, is extremely risky? It is system administrator. Installation and maintenance of software, operating system, all of them comes into this fellow's listing. He also takes care of proactive virus preventive measures. Okay, initiating backup, all of this. Next comes network admin. Network admin, overall responsibility to monitor the network. Okay, so he takes care of that. End user support. End user is what? Who is the ultimate user? Okay, basically trying to understand what are the issues, what are the challenges for people like you and I who are the end users. So if we have any issue, Wi-Fi not working in laptop, computer not working, keyboard not working, all these things they take care. Operational manager, again, day-to-day activities. Okay, day-to-day what he can do, what he need not do, etc. Then you have the concept of organization structure comes to an end. Then you have the CEB, culture, ethics, and behavior. This is nothing but again going back to our Corbett principles. Behavior is basically whether how the employees are behaving, what is their attitude, what is the culture which is built within the organization, and this has to be clearly communicated. Communication should be there, awareness with employee senior management should be there, and rules and norms which will be typically found in code of ethics. And let me tell you, code of ethics is a very important document because you need to compulsory go through the code of ethics so that you get some adequate guidance and knowledge. Then the next enabler is information. Information is nothing but data. It should be relevant, whatever you're capturing. It should be complete, as in 100% should be captured. It should be appropriate. It should be give proper sense. It should be concise. You cannot keep on holding large information. It should be in concise form. It should be complete. You don't record only first 10 days accounting entry, all the 30 days or 31 days. It should be an understandable and ease of manipulation. You should be in a position where you can easily manipulate it or change it the desired format you want it. Then comes your services, infrastructure, and applications. There's nothing but the technology stack, the applications which are used, the services. You may probably reuse a few of these applications and servers. You may either build or buy. Today we have one more option called rent. Okay, you may not buy it, you may rent it. It should be fairly simple. It should be agile, quickly scalable, and it should be openness. So that tomorrow if I don't use this software, I use another software, it should be easily implemented. Last bucket is people, skill, and competencies. This is a very critical bucket to ensure your skills of the people and competencies are continuously enhanced, and that's why you need to have mandatory training, knowledge updation, etc. The penultimate chapter speaks about performance management system, which is your fifth section. A performance management system is, we spoke about this entire governance. So how do you manage that? How do you perform? How do you monitor that? That's basically the performance management. Here is where your balance scorecard and other tools come into picture. Okay, so you basically establish the performance measures. What is the measure? Or in simple language, what is your target, goals and objectives? Many of us in our offices, we do not do this because we are a very fairly a smaller office. You look into larger companies, institutions, they make a performance measurement very critical. So what is it you have to do? And what is the criteria of you completing it? So establish and updating performance, establishing the accountability, gathering the performance data and reporting it. So these are four important things. First is, what is the criteria? How do you make each person accountable? Get the evidence for it and ensure that you are regularly reporting. So you can do a proactive or a reactive approach, depends. And you have two types of goals, which is outcome driven, we call it as key goal indicators, or we have performance indicators. So what is the key factors which I will look into? So these are two perspectives of defining it. And in a case of a Corbett scenario, ultimately it is the value which creates, which is basically used for this particular purpose. Okay, so this is the value creation, benefits realization, resource optimization, and risk optimization. So this is the stakeholder need, which is the value creation. Yeah. So what should be my strategic goals and enterprise goals? So if my strategic goals, if it is that high level goals aligned to supporting my enterprise vision mission, operation, this could be an MCQ question where they can give you what you see on the right hand side and they can say which type of a goal is this. Okay. Operational goals, this is more based on management. Reporting goals is for external reporting, internal reporting. Compliance goals is with the laws and regulations. Yeah. Then comes balance scorecard, which is something which I wanted to take you through. Yeah, these are just examples of performance measures: better use of communication, lower number of non-compliance, better cost efficiency. All these are story. There are few measurements which are defined in Corbett: enterprise goals, IT related goals, and process goals. This is again available in the Corbett toolkit, where you can actually go and see what is your enterprise goals, what is your IT related goals, and what is your process goals. So you can come from the top to the bottom. So if your enterprise goal is to create value, these are the 5 things you have to do. And in that, if you have to do what are the IT goals, these are the 3 IT goals, and from there you go to process goals. Not sure if I have a copy of that. Let me quickly see if I can share that as well. Yeah, I do have it. Yeah, so this is the mapping table between COVID, again, this COVID 2019. What you see over here are enterprise goals. Okay, what you see over here are your, sorry, these are your enterprise goals, these are your alignment goals. Okay, so it talks about what each of them is. Okay, for example, if you are your enterprise, your alignment goals are your INT compliance should support your business and regulation. Okay, it is mapped that compliance with external laws and regulation EG03 is a primary activity. So then what you do, you go to the next level. You have the EG03, whatever you notice over here. Okay, whatever you notice, you come from here. You come from this angle. Say, for example, you want to ensure your risk is managed properly. So for that, what is your primary alignment goal is management of INT. So then what you do, if your management of INT is your primary goal, then what you do, you filter out here, what are my primary and secondary principles. Okay, so if you look into primary principles, there's nothing but EDM03, which we spoke of sometime earlier. Or you can look into managed risk, which we spoke of sometime earlier. Rest all becomes secondary. Okay, managed secured services also becomes primary. So it depends on what your goals are. COVID, you can customize it. Now, for example, you want to, during the pandemic situation, you want to achieve business continuity. So EG06, business continuity and availability. In that case, what is your primary objective? Security of information, infrastructure and application, which is AG07. So you go to the next sheet, you just go over here, try to filter AG07. Where is AG07? Column J. AG07, you want only primary, click on primary, take care of this, you will take care of this thing. Now within EDM03, how to do it? I think I already have shown you EDM03 or DSS04. So if you want DSS04, all that you do is go search your DSS04. So these are the 41 items which you have to do in case you have to do anything on this thing. Define business continuity. So check whether you have business continuity plan. Identify stakeholder needs. So this is typically how it operates. Okay. Yeah, these are a few enterprise goals which we already spoke of, which we just showed in that screen. Stakeholder valuation, business continuity, compliance with law. You remember the top part of it. This is the enterprise goals. I hope you're getting some visibility now because I'm showing you certain things live as well so that you're able to understand it better. Okay, and these are the examples. How do you say that stakeholder value of investment is actually optimized? So you consider what is the percentage of investments were delivered meets the stakeholder expectation, whole lot of these things. Then you have IT goals. IT goals are what we showed you. INT goals, left hand side, correct? Alignment of IT business strategy, commitment, etc. So top we saw is enterprise goals. Then we have alignment goals. IT related, it was called as IT goals earlier. Now it is called as alignment goals. Okay, and this is how you have the metrics. And this is how you have the sample goals metrics in COVID. For example, EDM04, we spoke about that, ensure resource optimization. So what is this area? It's a governance because EDM is always to do with governance. Okay, so what is the description? What is the purpose? What are the IT related goals? This is nothing but if I go back to my Excel spreadsheet, all that I do is I go here, EDM03. Okay, so was it EDM03? EDM04, sorry. So I go back here, EDM04. Okay, evaluate resource management. You have the bunch of these things here. Whatever you notice over here, this is the object ID, this is the practice description. Continuously examine, evaluate current and future need for business. That is what is written over here. Ensure that resource needs, continuously monitor, whole lot of these things. But of course, mine is a COVID 2019. There have been some modifications. You can see IT related goals. Again, those have been defined there. And you have process goal matrices. So all these things are just a sample indicator. This will be, they're not going to ask you an examination, but you should be aware how these are actually configured and used. Yeah. Then comes balance scorecard, one of the things which is used for in examination as well, tested. It's a methodology where you manage your business strategy. This is one of the very few methods through which you're evaluating business strategy. So it uses a common level for all levels of common language for all levels of the organization, designed to identify and manage the business purpose. So it gives you a balance between the following activities. One can imagine or compare this with your, the Maslow's hierarchy, a few other management models. You have the BCG, which talks about cash cows, stars, all those things. So like the balance scorecard is also one methodology through which you can manage the strategy. Okay, so you have internal and external influences. You have what is called leading and lagging indicators. So what is doing very well, what is not doing well. Financial and non-financial goals, organization silos, aligns with the strategy. And BCP has 4 perspectives, very important. Examination as question: financial, customer, internal, learning. Okay, this is what makes BSC very unique. It focuses on the finance, it focuses on the customer. At the same time, it focuses on internal and learning. Okay, so financial perspective, financial metrics are classic lagging indicators. Common metrics are profitability, revenue, economic. Customer angle, customer satisfaction, loyalty, market share. Internal process are: do you have patents, do you have any ratios, any issues, inventory turnover, your employee turnover, zero defects. All these are internal processes. Learning are employee satisfaction, training hours, number of cross train, etc. And it can be used as a management tool for monitoring what's going on. It can be used as a measurement, where do we stand, and overall management also, or a direction setting also is possible. So this is how typically it looks like. So financial, you write what is there. Learning, you write what is there. Customer, you write what is there, etc. You have IT balance scorecard as well. Again, you can focus exclusively on IT angle. Okay, so this could be user orientation, how the corporate looks into it, etc. Again, this theory, do not worry too much about it. You also have what is called strategic scorecard. This is another measurement just for you to measure conformance and performance. Strategic scorecard: what is the strategic position, what are the options, what is the implementation, and what are the risks. I'm not going to discuss these in detail. I'm just seeing if any key things are. Maturity model. Maturity, CMMI is one such institute. Of course, now it is acquired by ISACA. Is a process improvisation approach. See, many of them realize that over a point in time, you need to mature. Now, companies like Wipro, TCS are fairly mature. Companies like, maybe some other companies much smaller, maybe level 2, level 3. If your friend or I or you start a software company tomorrow, we may be in level 1 maturity. So this gives a proactive model where you can actually reach. Please bear in mind, it doesn't mean that if you are there in maturity level 5, you are the best. For your level, even 3 might be best, because it may involve huge cost, it may involve huge operations, huge degree of resources, etc. Then of course you have your TQM. It's a management strategy to ensure that quality is taken care at all the levels. Okay, whether it's software, whether it's a day-to-day operation, HR, security, everywhere you focus on the quality. Okay, so that's basically the chapter 5. And the last thing is your chapter 6. How do I implement these governance and management practices? Okay, so here again, let me hit the bullseye without going into too many things. So each of these levels, you need to understand what is the key question. For the board, how do we set the goals? For business management, how do we enable them? For the CIO and IT manager, how do we plan, build, deliver, which is nothing but your COBIT? Risk compliance and legal experts, how do we ensure you're compliant with the law? And internal auditors, how do we provide an independent assurance? So these are the questions which we need to ask each of them. Okay, and for any sort of a success factor, first and foremost is you need to get the top management's buy-in. If the management is not very keen, nothing works. Okay, and all the stakeholders are aligned, effective communications, and you need to have this good set of practices. Again, I think we focus more on COVID. Yeah, what is that you have to do? First, establish the desire to change. This is basically the wake-up call situation. You realize that something is wrong. It is more like a eureka moment. I'm not sure many of them, for many of the CA firms, COVID became a wake-up call for them to migrate or upgrade to technology. Many of the other firms, or many of the other companies also, they realize that the way my business is running may not be relevant in the next few years. So that is the phase one. Phase two is identify or prepare an implementation team. So get a vision, success, goal, what you're supposed to do, how you're supposed to do, who are the people, get a sort of an assessment. Then have this thing communicated to the stakeholders. And then you need to empower them to identify what is the targets. Okay, what is there in strategy has to get converted into actionable item. And then you enable the operations and how do you actually go about. And then you embed the new approach. Okay, you decide that the old approach does not hold good. New approach is what is going to work. Start using the new approach. And then regularly repeat this exercise, which is sustained. Okay, so these are the key things which I can think of in this particular section. Again, it speaks about Corbett. You will realize this most of this chapter is predominantly from a Corbett angle. Yeah, these are all just role of IS auditors. Now, as an auditor, where to be coming into governance? We can audit governance as well, just for your information. But predominantly, we audit what the management did because we need to report to the board. But sometimes even the board is audited for reporting to the shareholders. Those are also possible. Okay, so you need to sort of optimize the value. A few governance practices are evaluate, direct, and monitor. And these are all matrices which you find repetition. Yeah, outsourcing. Yeah, whenever you're considering outsourcing exercise, please be very careful. What is the risk of our entity and what is the risk of the outsourced entity? Your SLA becomes a very critical document which defines the thin line between what your organization should have and what the other organization should be responsible for. Next is capacity management. This includes, storage space, network. Say, for example, you realize that during lockdown, there is more bandwidth requirement and therefore internet you may probably have upgraded to the next plan. Likewise, your storage, cloud storage, you're using Gmail, maybe only 15 GB is free. You wanted to go for the next one. So you took a 30 GB or 100 GB, you pay more for it. Correct. So all of this are your capacity plan. So please keep in mind, capacity planning is not just for the data. It includes for everything, network, bandwidth, storage, everything. What else is there? Yeah, I think that's about this particular chapter. I've kept it very crisp and precise, and I've not gone into too much of depth because this is a very theoretical oriented chapter. A few important areas, as I rightfully pointed out, is what are the roles and responsibilities, Corbett, 5 principles, and the 7 enablers. Risk element is very critical, and the last section would be your roles and responsibilities. So these much if you're going through, I think that's fantastic. Okay. Okay, so welcome to Production of Information Assets, which is chapter 4. As far as this chapter is concerned, as I told you, 20% weightage. 1/5 of your entire syllabus marks comes from this chapter alone. But having said that, from knowledge perspective and skill perspective, or from understanding perspective, there are a good amount of technical concepts over here which you will have to understand it clearly. So we'll spend some time on those technical concepts and expect a good amount of questions from these particular chapters. Okay, so let me quickly move on. I am not going to spend time on this thing. The general terminology is computer security. The focus is on a very important word which is called as the CIA, which all of us are aware: confidentiality, integrity, availability, popularly referred to as the CIA triode. Okay, and here please bear in mind it can include hardware, software, firmware, or telecommunication, any of these things. Then comes your information security. Information security is more to do with a whole bunch of these exercise of information risk and controls, how that is being balanced, what is the assurance over that, etc. Today this information security is slowly evolving, and the word cyber security is coming into picture, because today everybody have a presence over the internet, so therefore the importance of this cyber security is also equally coming in. Because today we cannot have a closed system, right? You cannot imagine of a system where you don't interact with the external world. You have to interact with the external world. Very, very important is the information asset. It is any definable piece of information which is valuable. Please bear in mind here the definition or value is a little different. We don't go based on your accounting standard 10 or your whatever definition of your asset is. Here we only, which is asset embodying economic value, etc. Here the focus is anything which is finding to be of value to the organization and cannot be replaced with, skills, time, resources, etc. Then we call it as information asset. A policy is also an asset. Training is also an asset. Correct? So like that, there are various buckets, and they form the part of the organization's identity. And of course, you require protection. Why protection is required? The gap or the widespread usage of technology. Today, almost everybody are technologically connected, and especially during this lockdown, technology has reached, to such an extent. A simple, oxymoron statement, where in school it was said that kids should not use mobile, but today the entire school itself is inside the mobile. Correct? So that's typically how this has become widespread usage. Interconnectivity, almost everybody is connected, real-time basis, real-time WhatsApp alerts. I'm not sure while we are speaking here how many of them are parallelly doing some other things. Correct? So elimination of distance, time, space, unevenness of technological changes. Then there is a devolution of management and control. So management and control goes on two different directions. Then there's physical attacks against organizations. This is increasing drastically. Okay, and there's of course legal regulatory requirement, technological developments, a whole lot of these things. So this is the reason why protection as such is required. So what is this protection? Safeguard of assets, preventing it from abuse. And you just don't require physical protection, but you also require logical, meaning it is not just enough if you protect the hard disk, you also have to protect the data inside the hard disk. So that is critical for you. Okay, so that is something which you have to please bear in mind. What is risk? I think we already focused on this. This chapter again makes introduction, again, concepts of risk. We'll quickly scan through, we'll not spend too much time there. Likelihood an organization would face a vulnerability which could be exploited, and it's caused because of the need to protect and sources of risk. I think we've already covered. Residual risk, the risk remaining after the countermeasures are analyzed. These are risk response strategy. We already noted this. Risk and control ownership. Every risk should have compulsory have a owner. Okay, every risk should have a compulsory owner who can take a decision. Risk control matrix. I think we already spoke about this. We also spoke about heat matrix. Possibility impact analysis. We also spoke about examples of threats. For example, a threat source could be hacker, cracker. Motivation could be challenge. He may want to challenge your organization. He may have ego. You might have told him that, boss, you are useless, fit for nothing, etc. He may want to challenge you. Or rebel. He wants to take some money, extortion, etc. What are the various types? Hacking, social engineering, unauthorized system, etc. Then you have a computer criminal, you have a terrorist. So all these are just a few examples of how the threat landscape is evolving. Then comes your risk strategy. This is a nice chart to give you an overall thought process. So you see your system design, whether it is vulnerable. If the answer is yes, if there is no, obviously it is absolutely fine. If the answer is yes, it's exploited. The answer is yes, then vulnerability to attack exists. And after that, you go to the next situation. You say risk is existing. Now comes the question, whether do you have to deploy a control? If the attacker's cost is much lesser than the gain he's going to get, okay? If the attacker's cost is much lesser from the gain, if you believe that it is yes, then you check whether the loss anticipated is greater than your threshold. If the answer to both of them is yes, you just say it is unacceptable risk, you sort of mitigate it. Otherwise, you sort of accept it. There's one more way in which you can look into it. Please bear in mind, there's just one such approach. There are hundreds of approaches how you want to adopt to the risk. And then, of course, you have the risk control plan. So this is just an example. You have the vulnerability, you have the risk level, priority, action, controls, whole lot of these things. I also showed you a sample of risk register, how it looked into in the previous session. Now we are quickly going to the next section, and the next section is information risk management and controls. In this section, we are focusing on what are the risks pertaining to information management, and the predominant focus over here, what we'll spend some time to understand what are the factors which influence an organization. It could be the incorrect cost of data loss, because incorrect cost, organization cost or data loss. You made some implication, you took a decision because of which there is a data loss. There's a decision which you have taken based on wrong data. There have been many cases where because the data submitted was wrong, decisions have taken, everything gone. Cost of computer abuse. Somebody else controls the computer. I'm not sure if you're aware, yesterday one of these e-commerce company was given a penalty of some 25,000 rupees, a small amount, but still was given a penalty, but for not doing something which is compliant under the under one of the regulations, correct? So you can obviously have some or other misnomer or misuse which can regularly happen. Value of computer hardware, software, personnel, high cost of computer, privacy has become a very critical domain today. Next, controlled evolution of computer. The way computers have evolved, the way it is being used is evolving and drastically changing. The information system audit requirements are also continuously coming into picture. And these are the 4 objectives. These are actually not continuous bullet points. These are sub bullet points. Sorry for the typo. Asset safeguarding objective, data integrity, system effectiveness, system efficiency. Again, there's an MCQ question, these 4 points itself. So let me quickly see if I can highlight those 4 points. Yeah, so these 4 points is what I'm referring to: asset safeguarding objectives, data integrity, system effectiveness objectives, system efficiency objectives. Yeah, this is the summarized chart. I'm not spending time here. Objectives of controls have fairly been very simple. It outlines the policies, it gives you a benchmark, and it can help you to reduce the risk. Difference between effectiveness and efficiency: effectiveness is qualitative, efficiency is quantitative. I repeat, effectiveness is quantitative, efficiency is qualitative. Efficiency is quantitative. How efficient you are, how quickly are you able to do. The system before was taking 3 hours. Now I introduced a technology control, or I brought in a software. I'm able to do it within 30 minutes. So I'm saving about 1 hour to 2 hours. That could be efficiency. Effectiveness, whether it is doing correctly, qualitative. Okay, so that is what is the effectiveness. Earlier also it is, earlier my process involved some errors. Now in the new process, is it giving me quality output? Because it's a rule. But a human being, when he does it, I will do it one way, you will do it one way. So there's obviously going to be delta. But assuming you have put it into a system, it happens everything in a uniform manner. Yeah, we also covered this types of control. PDC we already covered in chapter 2. We'll just have a quick recap, and then we'll also look into based on procedures applications. Okay, applications will of course cover in chapter 6. So types of internal controls: preventive, detective, corrective. We already aware. Preventive is basically checks which are put in place to ensure undesirable events do not take place at all in the first instance. Okay, an example could be restricting unauthorized entry. You can build a gate, you can build a security card. If it's a technology based, you use an access software, biometric software. Only after your fingerprint is there, retina, you can enter. Detective controls designed to ensure that omissions of malicious acts or omissions of these sort of indicators or these sort of activities, something gone wrong, immediately you get a signal or you are able to identify that. Next comes how to, one of these detective control is a hash total. This is something which is very interesting. Hash total is basically a non-arithmetic value, or rather calculated value. You consider the total of that. For example, I'm talking about purchase register. In purchase register, you have GST number, you have invoice number, and then you have the purchase value. Obviously, you will total the purchase value. But what you do is you also total the GST numbers. Of course, you have alphabets, remove the alphabets, total the GST number. Why? The moment you total, you will get one number. This purchase file, when you upload it into the GST website, check whether the file what you have uploaded in the GST website and the file which you have in your hand, both of these non-numerical field, or rather non-calculated fields or non-amount fields, I will sort of total it. So here also the amount is same, there also amount is same. So it is a comfort level for me that, okay, all my data is uploaded right. Alternatively, you can sort of, do one more version. What is that one more version? Have original data, have the invoice amounts, multiply both of them, divide, do some mathematical operation, get one new value, take that value and push it there. This could be a very handy exercise. In fact, I design a manual hash total whenever I have to upload certain files, just to ensure that between one file and another file, these numbers are sort of matching. Okay, you can use hash totals wherever you have some sort of a numerical field. Okay, and what is a batch total? Batch total is number of records in that batch. how many line items do I have in that batch, or how many such records are visible in that particular batch. So all those becomes your hash total. So my dear friends, hash total and batch total, all of these are your detective controls. I hope you're clear with this. Yeah. So both of these controls are important for you to understand where we use, and at the same time you need to bear in mind that these are critical tools which can help you to detect a fraud or a error or a mistake. Quickly going further, yeah, this is an example what you can see onto the screen, where you will have find that you will find that while preparing a wage bill, a batch total could be 3 records, hash total could be sum of all these worker IDs, and wage bill is the hours worked into rate. You can also have a complicated hash total where you can have a combination of hours worked multiplied into employee ID. So these all becomes a complicated hash total. Yeah, there's an example which you can see over here. I have a brand code, I have a quantity, a hash total can be this. So those of you are filing a TDS returns, my dear friends, you would have noticed that this hash total is actually there. Next is your corrective control. Corrective controls are those sort of controls or those typical controls which will ensure or which will make sure, my dear friends, that they are designed to reduce the impact. Okay, and please bear in mind, corrective controls will come into picture only if you have a detective control which is identified. If detective control is not identified, where is the question of correction? Example, you have an antivirus software. Sometimes it will detect a virus. Sometimes after a virus comes, it will sort of, it will say that we will quarantine or we will remove it. Of course, the quarantine word has become very popular now. But yes, so it sort of does this process. So when does it do? Only after it scans. I think we already discussed this particular chart, how the PDC controls operate. And we also spoke about implementation of these controls, relationship between the controls and implementation we looked into. These are a few other examples, how to distinguish between what is a preventive and detective. Approval for purchase over 10,000 is preventive. Detective is supervisor reviews it. So these all could be examination asked questions because they expect practical questions on this thing. One very important question which normally 70 to 80% is always asked, backup is a corrective control, not a preventive control. Yeah, these are all few examples from an internal control standpoint. Yeah. Now, what is the role of IS auditor? As an IS auditor in the entire risk management, your role is two things. Left hand side, you can do the function as an auditor. Right hand side, you can do as a management, or you can do it as an advisory or consulting. As an auditor, you facilitate conducting the risk assessment workshop. Now, what is a risk assessment workshop? This is not a very popular affair which happens in India, but I've seen it in few countries where I've done the audit, where I have been asked to do this. And the first time when I was asked to do this, I was a little surprised. But I said, okay, fine, let's give it a try. It's basically a process where there's one person who's like a trainer stands on one side of the room, and you're doing a workshop where you give them a particular objective and say, what are the risks which are there? And please inform us what are the typical risks which you see in your environment. Correct? So that's basically how, as an auditor, you can help you facilitate. Then you can also evaluate the effectiveness of the IS audit framework or the IT audit framework. You periodically review and verify, or you can also do this review of key management information. As part of management, you can set the risk appetite. And remember, setting the risk appetite, you need to understand how much is the risk. I'll give you an example. Now, you know that your insurance policy. I'll give you a very layman's example. Now, the customer comes and asks you, a client comes and asks you, sir, I have about 25 lakh rupees, which is my retirement savings, and I want to invest in some bank. Tell me which one bank, because today, what is that one bank recently, that Lakshmi Vilas Bank recently had some issue. So how do I safeguard myself? Is one simple question he asked you. So you think about various things. You will normally use one statement: don't keep all the eggs in a single basket. Why? Because one bank closed down, at least funds are available in some other bank. Great. So up to what extent will you ask him to keep? Because there is one insurance today, and as we speak, up to 5 lakh rupees. Tomorrow, if something goes wrong, also up to 5 lakh rupees you can recover. So you will advise them, boss, keep up to 5 lakh, keep it in 3 to 4 banks. How did you decide the 5 lakh? That is your risk appetite. Or you may keep maybe about 6 to 8 lakhs. The 3 lakhs you are taking the risk. So you have an appetite for that. Or you believe that, okay, come what may, it's not that if tomorrow that bank closes down, you're going to get that 5 lakh immediately. It is a long procedure. But at least you are sure that you will get that 5 lakh rupees. You may have short-term finance crunch, but you will at least get it. So you have set an appetite up to which you can take it. So that is how you typically determine your risk appetite. Imposing the management, taking decision, all of these things comes here. Then of course comes your control self-assessment. I told you, explained it in chapter 2 itself. It is basically the control owner evaluates the effectiveness of the control. Okay, what are the benefits, limitation, we already spoke. The second section focus on ISO 27001, Information Security Management Standard. Here we try to focus, of course, ISO 27000 was not covered in governance because it is covered in this particular section. The CIA objective is very critical: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Each of them refers to prevention of unauthorized. If it's confidentiality, prevention of unauthorized disclosure. If it is integrity, prevention of unauthorized modification. If it is availability, prevention of unauthorized withholding. Okay, an attack on confidentiality could be leaking of information. An attack on integrity could be, let us say, modification, data diddling. An attack on availability could be ransomware, where you're not permitted to your own data, you don't have the access to it. Now, what are the elements of security management? Any security management should always begin with the senior management support and commitment. It starts from the tone at the top. Then you need to compulsory have policies and procedures. If you don't have policies and procedures, it simply means that it's useless. So how should somebody do certain things? That's policy and procedure. Next, you have organization, roles and responsibility. Who can do what, when, how, etc. Security awareness and education, very critical, because most of the time, this is where people go wrong. They are not aware of what to do. You may have the best of the controls, but one ignorant user can damage the entire thing. You know, earlier it was like this cyber security language. I remember seeing a jovial cartoon. There was one cartoon in the left hand side in the 1900 attack. One aircraft or airplane, it used to fly by and it used to drop a bomb. 2020 attack, you know how it is? Same airplane, but it doesn't drop a bomb. It drops a pen drive. And obviously, if pen drive is that, everybody are excited. What is there in this? Insert in the computer. Over. Okay, so that is where it becomes very critical. So monitoring, compliance, all of those comes into picture. Then incident handling. What is incident handling? Incident handling refers to a situation. How am I handling a particular problem? An incident is a breach, a violation, a penalty, or a security breach, or an attack, or ransomware, any of these. And it is very important for you to understand how these have been handled, because you need to, most of the time, you judge an organization's ability based on how well they're able to handle this incident and these responses. Next, support. I think these are all just the general information. Support from senior management, information security policy, I covered them. Okay, so I'm not going into too much. Yeah, components of security policy is very good. You mentioned what is the purpose and scope. Those of you have not seen, I'm sure for your projects, etc., you have done security policies. In case you have not done it, you can visit this website called sansans.org. They have a good repository of policies. You can also wait for a few more days. I along with a couple of other senior faculties, we have drafted one guidance note on virtual CA office. In that, one of the annexures, we have given all the security policies which is applicable for a CA office. You can just go through it, you get some good guidance there. Okay, so these are generally the components of a security policy. What are the typical issues we have to address? We have to define what is the information security. What is the context and importance? Okay, it may be protecting my client records. It may be protecting my resource and the client records. You need to give that reference. And it also defines all the relevant security responsibilities, all the relevant supporting documents, etc. A few other components, you may also have business objective, members of the security policy. Who are normally the members? You normally have three fellows. One is management, who actually have the budget, who actually do all these things. Then you have the technology group. This will be the IT engineer, IT architects, etc. Then you have legal expert. The beauty of Chartered accountants or we as professionals doing this is we have expertise in all the three. We have expertise in budget policy management. We have expertise in technology. That is the purpose of this course. We have expertise in legal as well. Few types of information security policy. User security policy. Who can do what, who cannot do what. Then you have acceptable user policy. What is accepted, what is not accepted. Network and security policy. How is one system connecting with other systems. BCM, BCP, we all know that importance today, business continuity. Then comes organization, information security policy, overall IS policy. And then you have information classification policy. You're classifying the data. What is important, what is not important, etc. How do you draft it? These are the typical contents. You need not worry too much into it. What are the controls over the policy? You need to periodically review. This could be an examination question. What are the controls over the policy? You need to compulsory review the policy. It is not sufficient if you draft the policy. Every year, at least once you need to review, or once in 2 years, if it is a fairly stable organization, you can review it once in 2 years. Then you need to also analyze the log files, very critical. What is the meaning of a log file? A log file is typically a file which is having the list or the records or the transactions of activities. An example could be, it may have a record of who logged in at what time, who exited at what time, what is the ultimate purpose, or what is the time at which he entered. It may also have some history on who are the people who entered, as simple as a CCTV camera footage. Okay, and it is useful for you to relook after the incident is over, making it better, updation, etc., etc. And exceptions of this policy also should be clearly defined. Yeah, then you have your ISO 27000 family of standards, which you can notice over here. 27001 is the most important, which focuses on information security management requirements. Rest all are incidental, but it may make sense for you to be aware what each of the standard focus on. So 2702 focus on code of practice, 2703 focus on guidance, 274 focus on information security management measurement criteria, and the security risk criteria, so on and so forth. And this is the interrelationship. The 27000 is the overarching, 27001 is an ISMS. Rest all is just supplementing them in nature. Yeah, when you go for an ISO 27000, what is the requirements? Broadly, 5 things. First, you need to understand the context of the organization. When I use the word context, how is the security useful for the organization? Now, you as an organization may want to certify only one department, one subsidiary, one unit, or even one location, or the entire world at large. When I say entire world at large, all their global operations, it depends. So you need to clearly specify. Second, leadership commitment is very critical. How are your leaders committed? What are the policies, procedures, roles and responsibilities, segregation of duties, etc. Then of course comes the element of planning. How have you planned? What is your risk assessment? How have you done the risk treatment? Your risk registers, everything comes. Then is the element of resources, competence, awareness. Have you trained your employees? Have you communicated to them, etc.? And last is operational evaluation. Operations, how they evaluate it, how they're improvising on a regular basis, etc. This is an example in ISO 27001, application for HR security. Do you have a screening process? Now, what is the screening process? Have I verified everybody's background before they have joined my organization? Is there terms and conditions of employment? Okay, all of you have to comply with the following, only then you can go ahead. Then let us say information awareness. Are you aware of the following activities? Disciplinary action, or is there a formal communicated disciplinary action? So these are all good best practices. You can download this standard. I'm not sure if it's available for free. It may be a paid version, but there are extracts of these standards available on the social media and other places. You can always pick it up. Next, termination. If an employee is leaving the organization, what are the controls and practices in place? So all of these are typically a simple gist of examples. I'm okay. We can go ahead. Nothing to worry. I'm just having adequate precaution. Okay. We'll also look into few rules and policies for a better environment. What are those rules and policies? First rule or policy is segregation of duty. Segregation of duty, conflicting roles should be separated. Conflicting roles and responsibility should be separated. No individual should be in a position to carry out every step, especially of a sensitive operation. Non-sensitive, we are okay. In fact, the segregation of duty, we use the concept called as 4I principle, meaning maker and checker. In a banking environment, especially SWIFT, which is that international fund transfer, 4I is not enough. They want 6I: maker, checker, verifier. And this is a rule which they just brought in 2 years back after that unfortunate, PNB scam. In SAB, we use a concept called park versus post. Okay, so passed by one person, approved by another person. Then you have rotation of duties. Classical example is in banks. You will notice that each person after 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, they'll be rotated. Within the same branch, also cashier sometimes will be rotated. Each of clerks will be rotated. So they'll have a sort of a rotational. Then you also need to have a key man policies or KMP policies, meaning whoever are the key persons, you need to have a backup for them. In this process, how things would change. Whenever you visit any organization or when you visit your client, sometimes they will say, sir, he is a key person. Without him, the organization doesn't work. It's okay. But also be aware, if that fellow has taken leave anytime in this organization or not. If he has never taken leave, that means it could be certain dangerous indicators, correct? So those things also we should be aware of. Quickly moving further, what is the elements typically of an information security management? Commitment from senior management, I already told. Policy, procedure, guidelines. Organization structure, who is responsible for what. Then you have various other elements: security awareness, training, constant updation, all of those. Then you also have monitoring and compliance. What is monitoring and compliance? How are you monitoring who's doing what? Is there a periodical review in place? What is the legal requirements? And then you also look into incident handling. What is incident handling? How are you handling the incident issues? Whom are you notifying, etc.? Most of these organizations maintain an incident register. It's a simple Excel sheet. You can track them. What is the issue? We call it as a root cause analysis. What was the major issue? Why did this entire problem come? How can I mitigate it? What is the possible solutions? And then comes the element of ownership. Every problem or every responsibility should have ownership, because this will ensure accountability, and tomorrow if something goes wrong, you know whom to question. And if I say this is your responsibility, this is your baby, everybody will obviously take extra care of it. Correct? So therefore, you will ensure that as you scale up the organization, it becomes better. Otherwise, everybody will say, this is not my job, this is not my job. Then tomorrow, who is answerable? Correct? Custodianship. There's a clear difference between ownership and custody. Custody is when owner is not able to physically manage it. He gives it to somebody. In contract law, you have read one principle. You went out of town, you had a cow or you had a dog. The dog was given to the your friend's house, and the dog or the cow gave birth to a baby, and that baby belongs not to that fellow. Baby belongs to you, or what are that calf or that puppy. Custodianship versus ownership. Simple. Ownership means he is entitled for the risk and reward. Custodianship, temporary, just in charge. That's all. Classical example, when you keep your precious jewelry assets in a bank locker, bank manager is the custodian, you will still be the owner. In a case of a ERP environment, database administrator is the ultimate, you can probably call it as a person who's in whose custody the entire information is. Whereas the owner for a particular thing could be the respective department. An example could be, I'm in SAP or in a bank activities, branch activities. The branch manager would still be owning that particular customer's information. Of course, the customer will indirectly own. Internally, he'll say, this is my customer's data. Whereas the custodian will be the DBA or administrator, etc. Sorry. Next comes the control element. How do you have the control of it? Control is possible when you to determine what are the key controlling factors. The security administrator acts as a control. Okay, and this is critical because only if you determine what are the controlling parameters, you can realize how and what it is possible. And this is something which is very critical. Next, quickly moving on, you have what is called the roles and responsibilities. Again, you will notice that this is to some extent a repetition of what we covered in the previous two chapters or the two headers, because this is something which has come from the uh, um, information security angle. Just give me a minute. Sorry, yeah. So this is more from a information security angle, but the roles and responsibilities still continues to be the same. Steering committee, we spoke about this. A little later, you'll also find other senior groups. Who are these folks? Executive management. They take care of the day-to-day affairs, overall achievement of goals and objectives. Then you have what is called security advisory group. Now, these are only for certain specific issues. Now, these may be fairly senior management. They may have some extensive experience, extensive risk response strategies. They come into only certain specific scenarios. Then you have the chief security officer or the privacy officer or various roles. Depending upon the role, their work is defined. Then you have the information custodian. I think we spoke about. He will ensure safekeeping of information. Okay, safekeeping. One of his other work is also running regular backups and testing. Who is a custodian? DBA could be considered as a custodian. System owner, ultimately he is the owner. Remember, any access to IT resources, the owner should approve. It is like saying somebody wants access to the locker where you have kept certain confidential documents with the bank. Who can the bank manager give that person access? No. The access should be given by the owner, which is you or whoever the asset it belongs to. Likewise, if you want SAP access, Oracle access, you cannot ask the IT guy to give the access. You need to ask the guy who is in charge of SAP or in charge of Oracle. So system owner has the ultimate responsibility to approve or decline a access. Process owner, one level down, he just takes care of the day-to-day affairs or the processing requirement, etc. Today we have order to cash, procure to pay, etc. He may also be defined as a process owner. He is also focusing on continuously improvising. Then we have administrator. I think we spoke about this, responsible for new user, change of passwords, security patches, updates, etc. User manager, he is the fellow who's the immediate reporting boss. So you join an organization or you're auditing, you realize that junior level is A, his immediate boss will be the user manager. Now, user manager's approval is also necessary for all operational elements. Suppose say junior fellow forgot his user ID access. So normally the senior fellow will approve it, because you cannot expect the IT guy or somebody else to do everything. So whoever is aware of, so he will be the one level this thing. Super user, as the name itself suggests, he has the highest level of authorization. Okay, who can make any transaction, modify whatever he wants, he can do it. So therefore his access should be carefully administered. Then you have a security manager. I think I told you these are responsible for defining security responsibilities, etc. He ultimately reports to the CISO. Then you have external parties. External parties, can they have access to organization resources? Why not? But the access should be restricted. Access should be monitored. It should preferably be only read-only access, not write access. And the way in which you enter the agreement should be carefully looked at. At the same time, also please ensure there is an NDA, non-disclosure agreement compulsory in place. There is also a confidentiality agreement to safeguard your interest. Risk relating to the external parties, we have to consider what is the type of access giving, physical, logical network, what is the type of information which is required to process, sensitivity which is involved. Very important, you have to understand the sensitivity. Key function should never be outsourced. Key function should never be outsourced. Again, but today this principle is slowly changing, but generally this is the rule. Control in place for the company to check. What is the control in place for each of the companies to check it? The set of personnel involved in each of those arrangement. What are the controls employed by external party? Very critical. How sure are you that that external party, this fellow is the employee? What if some random fellow comes and says, "Sir, I'm an employee of this company, please give me an access"? Correct? You should have that. Legal, contractual, very important. Professional indemnity insurance. If something goes wrong because of him, they have an insurance. The insurance money will come to me. Forget about whether fellow pays me or not. At least the insurance money will come to me. The HR related security. Again, we focused on this in ISO angle. Here, the HR security at the stage of screening. You go do a compulsory background check. You check whether historically this gentleman is good, bad, whatever. You also have contract for employment performance. You have the standard NDA clauses, disciplinary clauses, all of them are defined. During the employment, he has to adhere to the policies. Periodically you have to train the person. You conduct training workshop quiz to check what is that awareness. Then you have termination. No documents must be, no documents should be taken. All of them should be returned. ID card surrender, declaration, and access has to be deleted immediately. One of the questions which reminds me here is, which of the following policies is the best practices for employee termination? Okay, I don't remember the options, but the option or the answer is integrating HR module with the access module. So if you integrate HR module with access module, the moment HR module, that fellow is removed, automatically all the access gets removed. Yeah. One more interesting thing which is coming up is BYOD, bring your own device. Employees today have been encouraged to bring their own device to a saving cost, reduces capex expenditure. Employees sometimes feel their own assets, they are flexible, comfortable, all of those. So this has a lesser cost of investment for an organization, and employees are welcome to do these sort of initiatives. It brings in flexibility, but it has a lot of risks. What are those risks? Network risk. We do not know where all that fellow is using that laptop or a mobile phone. We are unaware of the devices connected. Virus hits one network, all the devices, wherever he connects, the virus will actually spread. Device is itself having a risk. What if the device is stolen? What if the device virus, he does not have an antivirus software? The controls are having a failure. So all these things becomes devices. Then comes your application risk. Today, mobile vulnerabilities are significantly increased. So you need to be very cautious of that. And last is implementation risk. How do I implement it? What are the checks and balances? In fact, for one of the organization, when we are discussing on the BYOD in the healthcare space, okay, they were planning for a BYOD because of certain reasons, because of COVID, etc. They did not have too much of budget. So they decided that they will sort of monitor all the employee systems wherever they're using the personal resources. Then obviously becomes a big question. So employee will say, "Sir, if you are monitoring, then I'm losing my privacy." But company says that I can't do much about it because you're using your assets for my organization purpose. So it is a double-edged sword. We'll have to carefully deal with. Next, we'll focus on the next section, which is the data protection. When we focus on data protection, the primarily focus is whether I have an inventory of assets. And I also told you earlier, inventory of assets is very critical. These inventory of assets can also be addresses. It can also be IP addresses. It can also be where application is stored, where it is removed, modified, etc. It also depends on relative value of the organization. What is the value you're going to get? Where is this asset located? What is the security or the risk classification? Who owns it? Who is the custodian? All of them come part of your inventory of assets. How do I classify? Classify based on a policy. You may have some guidelines. You may have some information lifecycle, collecting, storing, transmitting. You may also have some breach incidents, etc. So based upon all these things, you have to consider and you have to classify that. So what is the forms of, or what is the typical files you have to classify? You have database, you have backup, online, offline, paper, user manual, training manual, annual report. All of these are typically data which you have to classify. What could be the classification, Sema? 5 categories. Top secret, confidential, sensitive, internal, public. Top secret is normally restricted. It's only few people have access. It could be, something relating to, a merger plan, something relating to annual results. All of those could be top secret. Then you have confidential, which is the general categorization, which people you do not want to share it. You don't want to give it to anybody. It could also mean recipes, trade secrets, etc. Sensitive could be your employee salary. If another employee gets to know, it's a problem, all those things. Then comes internal, something which is just known within the organization. Maybe memos, formats, templates. The last is your public. Public is everybody and anybody have access to it. Annual reports, etc. What are the benefits of classification? Examination asks question. The biggest benefit of classification is you know which asset has to be protected more compared to the others. You know what is the level of protection which you need to apply, and that is what is the benefits of classification. Data privacy. Now, data privacy, also popularly called as information privacy, it's basically how are you safeguarding the PII, personally identifiable information. What is personally identifiable information? Any information through which you can identify the person. With mobile number, can you identify the person? Reasonably, yes. So it's a PII. Anything relating to that, for example, name, your personal attributes, your age, gender, your financial income, all of these. Most of the banking financial sector, you are forced to give all this PII information by virtue of KYC requirements. In India, as I told you, we do not have a separate rule on safeguarding of privacy. However, Section 43 capital A of the Information Technology Act, read with information technology, reasonable security practices, procedures, and sensitive personal data information rules. It's a fairly big name. We call it as SPD regulations or SPD rules. They cover what is sensitive data. They say password is a sensitive data. Financial information is a sensitive data. Sexual orientation, physical, medical records, biometric, all of these are defined as sensitive personal data. So what they say, every business which is processing such type of data should have a privacy policy. It should be published in their website. And it should have also appointed a grievance officer. The policy must describe what information is collected, what is the purpose of information, to whom, how the information must be disclosed, what are the reasonable security practices you follow, in terms of, how access is given or how backup is taken. All of those are your security practices. Then, if you're collecting any sensitive personal data, it says you need to take a consent. A business cannot collect SPD unless you have taken the consent. That is why they put one tick mark. Okay, I agree, I accept. Correct? So consent has to be provided by letter, fax, email, etc. It should also, prior to collecting the information, give an option to that person saying, okay, if you want, you don't give this information, you will not be able to utilize these services. Give them an option of rejection as well. Then comes your notification. The moment if any issues takes place or if there is a challenge, you need to notify that what is the information which has been collected, what is the purpose, etc. And all of these are defined in your privacy policy. Next, they also say that a business cannot transfer SPD unless that country where you have transferred also gives the same level of protection or the rules are fairly same like that of India. And it is only for the performance of a lawful contract, just like that you cannot transfer. Now, this is indirectly referred to as the data localization principle, where sensitive data cannot leave India. In fact, in case of banking, insurance, they're clearly told that your data centers should be only in India, it cannot be outside. Reasonable security procedures, it involves any procedure equivalent to that of an ISO 27001 or any code or standards developed by industry or trade bodies. Now, as far as other privacy requirements are concerned, you have the PCI DSS, Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. This is a proprietary information security standard, which various card schemes like Visa, MasterCard are actually came across with, and it focuses on privacy elements. Then you also have the Information Technology Act 2000, which is as amended 2008. Then you have the RBI, which has also spoken about the privacy requirements. Then you have the CERTIN, which is Cyber Emergency Response Team, which is basically again a government body which steps in case of any cyber emergencies or issues. Yeah, this is the framework of your PCI, which speaks about. Foreign also you have a few other privacy laws. Gramm-Leach-Billy Act, this again applies in US. Video Privacy Protection Act. Then you have COPA, Children's Online Privacy Protection. This came in about a few years back. which speaks about any website operator, if he should not collect any information with respect to children under the age of 13, and in case he is collecting it, he has to take parental consent, what is popularly called as guardian consent. Then you have a very popular act called HIPAA, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. An equivalent act in India was proposed, but it did not get through. It was called as Disha, okay, but did not get through in India. Then you have the Electronic Communication Privacy, ECPA. I think that is, you cannot tap a telephone call and things like that. So you need to keep in mind a few key points for a data protection. Okay, physical security is required for all these type of assets: desktop, laptop, server, USB, and all of those physical security. Then you also have to ensure that your physical security should also be available for your backup media. You need to have a strong safe or a lock, fireproof cupboard, etc. Then you also need to have access controls based on need to know basis. And you need to define this access control matrix for approving or granting the access. So all of these are very critical. These are few points: content management, information policies, etc. What are a few steps which are associated with respect to any data leak? Again, this is more like a risk strategy: perform a risk profile, create awareness, establish a process. So you'll notice that this is quite similar to that of your risk assessment procedures. How do you classify the other information assets? You have various types like servers, workstation, portable devices, printers, network devices, unattended equipment. So all of these are different types of information assets. Yeah. So how do you ensure that an organization has an effective privacy policy program, privacy governance and accountability? They should have written policies and procedures, controls and processes, roles and responsibilities should be in place, training, education of employees should be there, monitoring and auditing, incident response plans. So all of this in one shot gives you the gist of it. Now, if you're an auditor or an internal auditor, what are the points you should consider? Laws and regulations, especially in our jurisdiction. You're operating in India, you're operating in Singapore. Singapore has a privacy law. Malaysia has a privacy law. Sri Lanka has a privacy law. Sri Lanka, I'm not too sure, but Singapore and Malaysia have it. Dubai recently came up with a privacy law. Bahrain has a privacy law. So like that, there are various regulations which are applicable. Typical area where internal auditors review: management oversight, privacy policies, data collection methodologies, consent capturing methodology, how are you using the PII, all of this gets covered here. So these are just a few questions from a privacy audit perspective. I'm not going to touch upon that. Then we'll move to the other section of your syllabus, which talks about controls. And in this section, we are going to discuss about a whole lot of these controls: physical controls, logical controls, environmental controls, network controls. These are the 4 set of controls which we're going to discuss. Physical controls, these are basically assets which are in physical form. You have to protect it. Earlier, there was no concept of internet, only computer and the printer or whatever is there. So it was a small, within an office, within a premise. But at that point in time, only physical controls were important. But with the invention of internet, with the growth of all of these, the extent of utilization of all of these has significantly increased. Therefore, physical protection, in addition, you also have logical network, environmental, etc. Physical security controls, these are ability of people to physically gain access to the system. Okay, it could be a bodyguard, it could be a doorman, it could be a ticket checker, a combination of all of this with person as well as technology. So what is the objective of physical access control? To protect the computer facilities, cooling facilities, microcomputers, etc. from intentional or unintentional loss, impairment, etc. So it may include a manual log, cipher log, control passkey, handle emergencies, emergency, if there is a situation where there's a fire alarm, what do you do? How do you run? All of those comes under physical access. A few types of threats: unauthorized entry, door was open, somebody comes in, sometimes animals come in, sometimes, some things can fly and come. Authorized personnel misusing their rights, unauthorized traffic, transfer, copying of data, sensitive information, etc. Making confidential information sensitive or sensitive information publicly available, damaging the assets, throwing the assets. Forget that the recent floods, the rainfall, all of these could have a impact. Of course, these floods and other things comes in the environmental, but they just have a relationship. Alternate of sensitive information resources, alteration of these resources. So all these becomes a physical threats. Damage due to wars and disturbances. Embezzlement of computer, take the computer and disappear, correct? Or sometimes computer resources, floppy, CD. A public disclosure of sensitive information, blackmail, industrial espionage. All these things are actually happening. Who are the perpetrators? Former employees, outsourced agency, employees on strike, employees under termination, notice period, addicted gamblers, disgruntled employees, biggest risk, etc. What are best practices? One very important best practice is ensure the number of entry points is restricted, only one or two. Anybody wants whoever, the CEO, CFO, whoever it is, only one entry. Or if you want more than one or two entry, depending upon the organization size you may want to have, but preferably encourage everybody to come through this. Next, all the guests have to compulsorily visit the front desk, only then they can enter the environment. Many of the places, what happens, the guest will come from some other entrance and they will give one small ID card and they say, please go. So these are risky. Have a security guard who will validate the picture ID. He will check whether you are that person or you are somebody else. Especially now everybody wearing mask, this has become a big constraint. You don't want to remove the mask. Security guard also saying don't remove the mask. What if you remove the mask and sneeze in front of him, correct? So that becomes a risk. Encourage employees to question strangers. Now I was jovially reading somewhere heights of unemployment and joblessness. So one fellow said that he went to a place where apparently somebody told that, hey, I heard that your relatives and other people are tested positive for COVID, so why don't you get yourself tested? So this fellow was a young fellow. He told his uncle or relative, I don't have money for testing, you give me the money, I'll go get it tested. So this uncle or relative said, I cannot test you, you do whatever you want. I cannot give you money, you do what you want. So this fellow immediately what he did, he went near his uncle, hugged him, sneezed in front of him and came back and he said, if you are tested positive, please let me know. I will also be in isolation. Correct? I mean, jovial jokes apart, but things are, on these lines. So physical security measures, I think these images itself speak for itself. Guards, dogs, compound walls. Deadman doors is what you notice over here. These are deadman doors. You will find it in metro or cricket match stadiums, etc. These are general types of perimeter security. Next comes advantage of electronic doors and locks. It has a higher level of security. Same device can distinguish authorized user and unauthorized user. So you need not give multiple keys to various people. Just give one card, that's all. Even if that card lost, no problem, disable that. Individual access can be restricted. Restriction can be assigned to particular door or to particular hours. Only this time, only this particular door. Duplication of that card is very, very difficult. Duplication of such card is extremely difficult. Then card entry can be easily deactivated if there is some trouble. Then useful in case of card being lost. You also have a feature called card swallow. What is card swallow? The moment a preset number of failed attempts, automatically it will just, it's like your account getting blocked. Like in case of a bank, your PIN gets blocked, etc. Right? So that's basically how it works. Next, you have your biometric locks. You have what is called as your biometric lock. Biometric is again fingerprint, eye, retina, etc. So all those things are your biometric locks. Next is what is called as biometric devices. These are again generic devices which speaks about a whole lot of procedures. Retina, fingerprints, your scan, your iris scanner, facial scanner, hand geometry. Iris and retina have two different things, so please be aware of that. Examination question. False rejection, false positive, false acceptance, false negative. False rejection or a false positive is a valid subject is being rejected. I repeat, a valid subject, I'm sorry, a valid subject is rejected. Now, what is the meaning of a valid subject who is rejected? Somebody who is right is not being given the entrance, which is okay. False acceptance is the bigger problem. Invalid subject is accepted. Very, very dangerous. Invalid subject is accepted. So both of these, my dear friends, have a good possibility of an examination uh, uh, occurrence in the examination. False positive is where a person who is good, who walks through that metal detector you have seen in most of these movies, despite he walking through it, they have given him the confirmation. So it really doesn't matter. Correct? So at that point of time, the machine says, okay, this fellow is good, but actually he's a bad guy. So that is a false negative. That is a false, it is accepted. Whereas false, if it is rejected. So which is more riskier? False acceptance is more riskier. Because invalid subject says, kuch problem nahi hai, chale ja. Valid is rejected is also a problem, but not as high as invalid subject being accepted. So a few other factors you have to consider: how much time they take for enrolling, what is the throughput rate, say for example how quickly can it process. I've gone through, I've seen some certain sites because few of these India and some other country matches where I had to do an audit on the ground. One of the things we had to verify is that the turnstile, how fast it operates. Now what happens is, in those cases, whenever you have these large matches, obviously the crowd is rush huge, so the police or the authorities keep saying that, chale jao, chale jao, chale jao. So if that turnstile takes even a few seconds later, they are in a pressure. They say, okay, you disregard the turnstile, start sending everybody. Anyways, you have the ticket in hand. But what if that fellow has forged the ticket? Correct? He can always take a color xerox of that. So the only way you can verify is that barcode, turnstile, etc. So you have to be very careful in those circumstances. Yeah. Then comes perimeter detections, photoelectric sensors, dry contact switches. Then you have smart cards with photo, with only code, wireless proximity sensors, all of them. Humidity. One very, very important question which will normally come in the examination, humidity. Uh, humidity is basically moisture content. Humidity is more to do with moisture content. Now, what happens if there is a moisture content? Very simple. High humidity causes corrosion. I repeat, high humidity causes corrosion. Low humidity causes static electricity. So this is something very critical. High humidity causes corrosion because more water, possibility of getting rust is extremely high. Low humidity causes static electricity. So combination of this, they question high humidity, static electricity, low humidity, static electricity, high humidity, corrosion, low humidity, corrosion. Four combinations are there. You can expect an option in the examination. This is CPTD. This is just for your reference. Crime prevention through environmental design. So here what the focus is, you design the environment in such a way, you design it in such a way that the physical environment can reduce all the crime by itself, by directly affecting the human behavior. So the crux of CPTD is that the environment itself is designed in such a way so that human being, if he has to commit a fraud, he will think twice. For example, if you have a large open area in front of a building, so obviously it means that if suddenly there is an alarm ringing somewhere and this fellow is running, it obviously means that this fellow has done something, correct? So a data center should be at the center, it should not be at the side. Street light should be always lit. There should be street benches and tables. It depends on various things. So these are all examples of CPTD. Then you have something called target hardening, making it difficult for an enemy or an attacker to attack a system. Okay, it could be artificial barriers, physical barriers, etc. And this is basically called hardening. So you ensure that something is hardened, so you cannot easily go and attack that. Okay, now how do you audit physical access? Again, the typical procedure is the same. You assess the risk, you focus on the controls, you review the documentation, and you test these controls. Some cases you can test it, some cases you go with a historical, like logs, etc. You try to understand and look into it. So what are testing of controls? You sort of tour the organization, physical inventory, physical controls, you have to be physically present only. It is not possible. So due to COVID, there have been some interesting things which has happened. Where we had to do some physical verification, not of assets, physical ID controls. We didn't have an option. So what we did, we asked that person to download the Zoom app. We gave the we installed the Zoom app in the security guard's mobile. Two securities were there. Security guard went throughout the office, and from there we had to monitor. We didn't have an option. There was one more case where from the CCTV footage alone we had to do the audit. So these are all things which are interestingly changing because of this COVID situation. So what are the various things you will test? Computing, storage, communication closets, backup, printer rooms, disposal yards, inventory. All of these are areas which you test. Some special points to consider: entry, exit, glass windows and walls, movable and modular cubicles, ventilation, air conditioning, false ceiling. False ceiling is very important, especially when there are ducts, etc. Is there some accidental entry? I've seen good number of James Bond movies where inside false ceiling and inside that air ventilation ducts people can move in. So those things you have to be careful. I'll just take a 1 minute break for myself, okay, because of this voice. So I'll just take a 1 minute break for myself and I'll just come back. I'll be here itself. Just give me a minute's break. Resume the recording. Perfect. So the next thing which you're going to look into is the environmental controls. And when I speak about environmental controls, these are all those things which we see in and around us. Okay, this could be because of aspects such as your environmental factors, natural disasters, man-made disasters, equipment, documentation, or facilities. All of this can come here. A few examples of natural threats which you can see: temperature variations, humidity, vapors, etc. And then you have your man-made threats: fire, negligence, war, action, bomb. Whole lot of these things comes under man-made threats. Food particles. There's a very interesting threat, especially in server rooms. I happened to go for one very remote place, one audit, where it was a small bank. They had some 3 branches or something, cooperative bank. And the head office, when I went to do an IT audit there, I saw 2 people inside the server room. They were eating food. I asked them, "Sir, why are you eating here?" He said, "Sir, temperature is very hot. Outside, no power. There's only place where there is power. There's only place where AC is there. So happily we're sitting and eating." I was surprised by their ignorance. Okay. So that's something which is very critical. Again, you have to focus on EMI and radiation. That's all, again, a few critical things which you have to consider. Next comes your exposure. What are the exposures? Typically from fire, what could cause? Magnetic tapes, what could cause? Your poor quality of cables. All of these could have a implication, and that could result in a massive fire or anything relating to that. Lightning can burn up the entire thing. Continuous process, damage to keyboards, sometimes liquid. You're having something and it spills over. Chemicals or liquid spills. There is a surge in power. Fungus formation on tapes. All of these can create a lot of exposures. Next, forms of power degradation examination question. If you have excess power, it could be 2 types: spike or surge. Spike is suddenly it increases and comes down. Surges, for a long time it will be there like that. Sometimes in the night we notice that 11-12 p.m. or something, there's a sudden surge. So every time we presume that it is only spike. So you have to be very clear with what is spike and surge. Spike is just momentary. Surge is a long duration. Next, reverse, power loss. Fault means moment of power outage. For a few seconds it is not then come out. Blackout, no power at all. Prolonged. And normally in India we just call it as power cut. It's basically popularly called as blackout. Now, power degradation can also be sag, dip. For a few seconds it came down. Please note, fault means no power at all. Sag or dip means there is a low voltage power. Sometimes your TV or your mobile phone charger you are able to use. Your LED lights are working, but your tube lights are not working. Fans are moving very slow. All those scenarios. Brownout, prolonged low power. Inrush current, suddenly there has been a surge. So there's a nice image where you can get the entire difference for your quick understanding. Okay. Now, what are the steps to prevent static electricity? You need to use anti-static flooring carpets, especially in data center and other places. It's recommended. Ensure that you have a proper humidity. What the water content, etc. This is typically achieved by having air conditioning. That's fine. Proper grounding should be there. It should not be that all wires are all over the place. Don't have carpeting area in data centers. Have it static free carpets if necessary. And wear anti-static bands whenever you're working inside that particular system. Because even if there's a quick power this thing, these anti-static bands will safeguard. Power issues, there are two things, EMI and RFI, electromagnetic and radio frequency. These are two examples. Whenever you find motors, you will find electromagnetic interference around it, and RFI is a radio frequency. A few techniques of environmental control: choose a design safe place, plan the facilities, location, documentation should be taken care. People who are responsible for training, they should be regularly being trained. Emergency plans should be there. Vendor, suppliers, third party risks also should be taken care. Then you also have maintenance plan, MTBF, MTTR, very important examination question. MTBF, mean meaning average, mean, median, mode, right? Mean. Time, TIM time, between failures. MTBF, mean time between failures. Between two failures, what is the time? Average time between two failures. MTBF. Then you have MTTR. MTTR is basically mean time to recover. I repeat, mean meaning average time to recover. What is the meaning of average time? How long does it take for you to recover? Remember, mean time to recover should be a very, very short duration, whereas mean time between failures should be very, very high. The failure occurs now. When do you expect the next failure to occur? Obviously, you don't expect it. Or go back in history. What was the last two times the gap between two failures? That is mean time between failure. Mean time to recover. If a recovery happens, if there's an attack, how quickly am I able to recover? And these are important even from a BCP chapter. Fire resistance, walls, floors, ceilings, concealed or protective wiring, ventilation, air conditioning, power supply, all these things are good techniques of environmental controls. So also you choose a design site which is characterized by the following. It should be safe, not much of, if I could probably call it as, it should not have too much of technological exposure, correct? And at the same time, it should not be a situation where you landed up or you had a trouble in terms of, transportation, your external services, all of these should be taken care of. Few considerations during designing your walls, your ceilings, floors, windows. In fact, when you go for environmental and physical inspection, you verify all of these things. Media protection, sprinkler system, how the sprinkler has been there. There should not be a sprinkler system inside the server room, very important. It can have a smoke detector, but not a sprinkler system. Water and gas lines, air conditioning, etc. Then comes your facilities planning. I'm not touching this too much. This is basically, few threats. Now your neighbor kept a generator right next to your server room. Those could be areas. All of a sudden there is a change in climate, building construction, there is a huge amount of dust, water level increases, all those things you have to take care. Also, please ensure UPS, surge protectors, power lead from two substations. In India it may not be possible, abroad it is possible. Just have a backup power and the generator. Yeah, these are few other environmental control techniques. You can just have a quick glance through it. Yeah, this is again an examination question. Water-based system. You have wet pipe, dry pipe, and pre-action. Wet pipe, dry pipe, water continuously flowing. Dry pipe, water will flow only when there is a requirement. Wet pipe, water continuously flows. Pre-action is a combination of both. Gas-based halon and carbon dioxide. Today, I think halon is banned by the United Nations Convention, so therefore it's normally not possible. Carbon dioxide is definitely being used in certain cases. Yeah, they can ask you which of the following techniques can be used in a unmanned location. In that case, you can use gas-based system. If there's no human being, the gas, even if you release, it will suppress the fire. If there's a human being, then there's obviously a problem. So what is the order in which you will save a person? Save, first and foremost is human life. Second is data. Third is software. Fourth is hardware. This is the sequence under which we will always save. First is human life, because we know human life is the most valuable. Second is the data. Third comes your software. Fourth comes your hardware. Okay, I'm not spending time on auditing of all of this. Let's quickly go to logical access control, which is the second last section. Yeah. So here, my dear friends, you will realize that this is an important section for a simple reason. Um, Most of the attacks today, my dear friends, are all logic based. Most of the attacks today are all logic based, meaning remotely it is being accessed. So therefore, it becomes very critical for any person to actually reach out. Okay, so when I use the word logical access, I'm referring to attack through the system. And when I say attack through the system, here we are looking into some method where the user is sitting in some remote corner physically, but logically can still plant an attack. A classical example is all these hacking, etc. Hacking is just one such commonly used terminology. There are so many other terminologies. What are the objectives or what are the types you can do? You can provide access on a need to know basis. You have to need to always ensure what is called as a need to know basis and need to do basis. What is need to know and what to need to do? That means only if it is necessary, you will provide them the access. This is one of the answers you will find in your MCQ question. Which of the following is a principle for providing access? Or which of the following is not a principle for providing access? Somewhere they will try to find you. Need to know, need to do basis is a least privilege. All these are words they will use. How can you access a application? You can access the computer directly through the hardware. You can access it through the software. You enter the software. You can access directly the database. You can directly access the application such as Tally. You can access it through an access control software. So like this, there are multiple routes under which you can access. So what are the types of computer crimes and exposures? Examination asked popular questions. So what are these? They anything which has a compromise on the CI of the organization, and this is because there is a gap between need to protect and actual protect. So what are a few examples of these threats? Financial loss, reputation, profit, legal repercussions. They may sue you. Loss of credibility or trust, competitive edge, blackmail, organized crime, sabotage. There is an intention to cause damage. Then there are these hackers, they attempt to test the access restriction. They prove the ability to try to overcome attacks, all of those things. Then you have script kiddies. Now, script kiddies, these are all kids who are just trying to play around. They do not know, when I say kids, I'm not referring to actual kids. They may be kids. These are guys who don't know proper programming, but they just do some copy paste work and push it. They are not able to write their own scripts. So any unskilled individual, all these people can come into this. Then you have employees. Employees are a huge source of risk. Okay, why? Because you never know. They are the biggest asset. They may also become the biggest liability. Many of the researchers are saying that 60 to 90% attacks happen from insiders, intentional, unintentional, weak passwords, ignorant employees, disgruntled employees. Very very risky and dangerous. Then you have a concept called spoofing. Spoofing is creating a fake IP, fake address, etc. You create a full spoof website. There was once, I think, one spoof website similar to our institute's website, ICI. So, then they caught hold of some the person who was doing, they blocked it. But still, all these are issues which can come. Then dumpster diving. Dumpster diving is basically going to the dustbin and actually searching. Most paper records, optical, all of these records, they should ideally be shredded. Otherwise, you go open that, read and try to understand. Go through the dustbin, go to the trash, go through the deleted items. They may actually try to get some idea. Then is your phishing, which all of us are aware. It's a social engineering technique. Attempt to acquire password, credit card information, etc. by trying to show that I am a legitimate person. So sending an email link, you have got some award, whatever. Please click this link, enter the details. Then what happened? That fellow will either install a software or you will enter the details. He'll ask for username, password. Account is compromised. You also have various versions of this phishing. Wishing is something which happens over phone. Smishing is something which happens over SMS. These are examples. Then you have data diddling. Data diddling is modification of the data before or during the entry. So you are entering the data, or you are about to enter or before the data, the source itself you modify. Or the data, whatever you entered 35, it gets saved as 58. No, counterfeit documents, all these things are examples. Then you have masquerading. He pretends as though he is an authorized user and he tries to gain an access or greater privileges. Or he may have lower privileges, but pretends as though he is a higher privileges in order to cheat the person. Then is piggybacking. Piggybacking is somebody forgot to sign out. You go open the website and you notice that he's forgot to sign out. His email ID is available. Send all possible emails or send all possible unauthorized activity. This is also called as tailgating. Tailgating is normally used in physical. Piggybacking is used in logical. Tailgating is one fellow opened the door, one more fellow just entered with that fellow's access. Next, you have social engineering. Social engineering is the act of obtaining or attempting to obtain secure information by informing that fellow that trying to cheat or persuade his mind, or trying to play a story and say that try to get this information. Yeah, I'm your friend. Why can't you give it? We are from bank. Why don't you give it? I am your supervisor. I should obviously have it. I am an auditor, give me these details. So all those things are critical. So employee may be tricked in various methods. So various methods of social engineering are there. Next, you have malicious codes. A few of these examples are here. A virus basically that is attached to a host computer, which can basically do some damage. They are normally independent programs. Then you have a worm. What the worm does is it will keep on duplicating itself. Okay, it will keep on creating so many versions that you will not know which is original, which is the fake one, which is truth and which is false. Okay, it will create so many versions. Then you have logic bomb and time bomb. These are files which get activated whenever there is some sort of a malicious code entered. It could be intentional or unintentional. At least logic bomb could be unintentional. Examination question: which are the following attacks could be unintentional? Logic bomb. Okay, so what happened is that year Y2K was an unintentional logic bomb. What happened was after 1999, at the point in time, all the systems were having DDMM YY form. So 99 was the year. After 99, what happens? There is no other option because 99 is the last digit. So they had to all write a code, script, etc. How the 99 can become 2000. Correct? So therefore, it took a lot of time. So this was a classical example of a logic bomb. Nobody envisaged because computers were still developing at that point. Next, in terms of time bomb will explode on a particular date. Let's say after 6 months after you use that application or software, it may explode and make the application or the software slow. Therefore, you are not able to enjoy that particular application. Trojan horse, they are again hidden. They sort of copy information from your system and send it to some unauthorized person. Botnets, as the name suggests, bot is a robot, net is a network of robots, which can do some mischief. Okay, now what are these fellows? It's like, some fellows were browsing the internet, many of them downloaded something, some malware was there. Now the attacker who was the creator of this malware, he roughly knows who all is downloaded. He creates a network of all of them and he creates a robot within that, a bot, an automated program. So whenever he sets one instruction, all the computers start attacking one system. Okay, now this is how a denial of service or a distributed denial of service attack happens. Let's say it is GST day, or let's say it is TDS filing day, or even if it is e-commerce sale day. All these fellows will start attacking. So genuine user is not able to access. There's something like this. So hacker attacks about few computers, has a control of few computers, and these computers in turn can control much more computers. Then you have logic bomb. Logic bomb is something which I just told you. It's more like something which will blow up because of some incorrect configuration, incorrect installation, etc. The logic bomb will wait until that particular event or a trigger has to happen. So assuming some file was accidentally deleted or some other issue is there, it will actually get activated. Then you have microvirus. This is something which infects Microsoft Word or similar applications. Then you have polymorphic. Polymorphic are very difficult for you to identify because they're all hidden virus. and they normally antivirus software also find it's very difficult. So you have to be very careful when you are trying to remove it. Then comes stealth virus. They hide their presence from both the operating system and the antivirus software by encrypting themselves. So they're quite similar to polymorphic and very hard to detect. So these fellows also encrypt themselves. Adware and spyware, whenever you download some software, etc., sometimes when free advertisements will come, you download that. Browser gets changed, you keep getting advertisement. Or spyware, some software which will spy you is also getting downloaded. What are the types of attack which can be launched on passwords? Brute force attack. Brute force attackers continuously keep on entering the passwords. You know password is 6-digit, only numerical. So start all combinations of numbers and enter. So that's a brute force attack. Next, dictation attack. Take any dictionary word, copy paste and push it into the system to check whether any one of the users, any dictionary words is able to attack. Then we spoke about Trojan. It will share the password, copy paste. Spoofing attacks or masquerading, faking or creating dummy. Piggybacking. Piggybacking refers to one person entered. Behind that, without that fellow's knowledge, another person enters. Then you have salami and rounding off. Salami and rounding off or slicing small sums of money. If it's a small sum of money, we call it as salami. If it is a fixed money, or if it is just a round off related, then we call it as a round off error. In a salami, for example, here 535.38 may become 535.33. So 5 paisa or cents, whatever you can call it, is basically written off to another account. But what can happen in rounding off? In rounding off, the transaction gets rounded off to the next most nearest integer. Now, how do you have control over logical access? Examination as question. These are a few methods: user management, responsibility, network access. We're going to spend a few minutes on each of them. User management. So every time a user gets access to a resource, first there should be a registration process. Who should approve the registration? Normally the owner should approve the registration. There should be an approval hierarchy, user ID, password, etc. Next is privilege management. Privilege management is nothing but it gives you a high level what exactly are the important principles, or what sorry, more than principles, what exactly are the extent to which he or she is having data, or what is the extent to which he or she can manipulate over and above the normal users. Next, password management. How frequently should I change the password? What is the minimum period? What is the password combination? All of them come. Then monitoring access, revocation of access. Then comes your user registration. It should be done based on job responsibilities. You need to track each of them. Then you need to review user access rights. Very important. It is not sufficient if you give them the access. You need to review that. Why? Whether the access is still relevant. What if that fellow has left the organization, but I forgot to revoke or cancel the access rights? Yeah. Then comes your password or authentication technique, also called as identification techniques. These are popularly called as what you know, what you have, and who you are. I repeat, what you know. What is it that you know? You know a password. You know a PIN. Next, what you have mobile phone. Inside that password can come OTP. Then what you have. What is it that you have? Who are you? Who are you is what? Biometric. So these are the possible combinations. Next comes your multi-factor authentication. It's just a combination of either of these three. You can just have a look into this image, you will get an idea. You also have authentication technique, one-time password, challenge response, CAPTCHA, all these things. Then you have token-based authentication, memory token, smart token, proximity readers. You bring the card near, only then it will get activated, etc. Password management is a very important exercise. You should know how the system administrator is configured. The first default password should always be changed. And the password should never be stored in plain text. You should hash it. In other words, what is plain text? Password stored as it is. Hash means encrypted. So password in the backend should always be encrypted. Then you have single sign-on, SSO. Single sign-on refers to using one login credential or using one access. Once you make the initial access, all other applications gets accessed automatically. Please note, it doesn't mean that you use the same username password everywhere. No. Using one access, everywhere you can access. Example, Gmail. Once you log into Gmail, you can go to what is this G Suite. You can go to Google Drive. You can go to YouTube. You can go to photos.google.com, contacts. Once you log in. You don't log in every place, correct? So that's a single sign-on example. Yeah, just a clarification on password management, which was there in the previous slide. Password management refers to how are you managing the password in a organization, more specifically how the administrator is actually overlooking it. An example could be the moment first time you log in, compulsory you have to change the password. You should not store the password in plain text. You should store it in hash. Okay, so all these are a few examples. Yeah, single sign-on, we just discussed it. Now, what is the weakness of single sign-on? It is a single point of failure. Why? If your Google security compromised, everything compromised. Second, it may be vulnerable to password guessing because all the places you're just using one credential. And it does not protect network traffic because one place you sign on, everywhere it works. There may be some practical difficulties. Next is network access control. Now, when you say network access control, here, how am I accessing the network? What is the access policy on use of network services? Who can use what in network? Segregation of network, guest network, developer network, user network, etc. Then you can also have network connection and routing. How is the traffic which moves between the various networks? Then you have enforced path. Specify the exact path or the route connecting the networks. Then you have clock synchronization. Clock synchronization is my clock and the system clock, everything is synchronized. It's not that I installed one free software for 15 days and then I went and changed the date. Again, it gave me 15 days free. No, it should be synchronized across the one place. Then you also take care of a few things. Sensitive system isolation. Any sensitive, it's like, any person who's having COVID symptoms, they isolate it, right? So something similar to that. Sensitive system, you isolate it. Then you have event logging. If there is any issue in terms of what event it is, you sort of log it so that you can reconstruct the event, identify what happened. You also monitor the usage of system. Access controls are of two types. Examination question. MAC and DAC. MAC refers to mandatory access control. Here the rule is very, very simple. Everybody same access. You cannot modify, the owner cannot modify anything. Filters are used to validate ground level access without any exception. Okay, it is normally role based. Cashier all same access, clerk all same access, data entry operator level 1 same access, etc. Then you have discretionary. Discretionary is configured or modified by the users. You can do customization. You can do some bit of change. You can do some bit of decentralization. So all of these are possible and these are called as DAC. Please keep in mind, DAC cannot override MAC. So MAC is the high level. You can do some customization. Then comes database access. What is a database? We all know that. That is where the data resides, correct? It could be a system like Oracle, etc. And they have a sort of restrictions. You can update, view, delete, etc. Database access should be very, very carefully monitored. Preferably logs should be enabled. Whoever can do direct backend operations. Then few other things from our operating system. Automatic terminal identification. You are logging into the system. How do you know which system, what, when, etc.? How am I able to get into that? Then you have terminal login procedure. Now, terminal login procedures is nothing but I can log in only from a specific terminal, no other terminal. User identification authentication. How do I know this fellow is the user? He has to authenticate himself by entering username, password. Password management, periodically change passwords, etc. We spoke about. Then use of system utilities. What are the system utilities? What are the critical functions? It could be addition of users, deletion of users. All of them are taken care of the operating system. When it comes to mobile computing, you also focus on physical as well as logical access, and we also focus on ensuring additional controls are there because they are mobile. That means they can keep on going anywhere. And these are examples of access controls. Privileged logons, these are users who have a privileged login, as in special login, also popularly referred to as super user. Audit of access controls, again, this is general GAN there, which is, okay. And the last one is network controls, okay. How do I focus on network controls? So what are few characteristics of network? Network is anonymity, because you do not know, whenever you're accessing somebody on network, you do not know who, what, when, why, etc. You're just accessing over a particular place. Then there is, sorry, there is a lot of automation. When I use the word automation, I'm referring to minimal human. So yesterday we spoke about, all the network components, traffic gets redirected, etc. We are not going to sit and read it. Automatically it is being configured. Correct? Distance, it eliminates a huge amount of distance. Endpoints at various locations. Opaqueness, you do not know each other. There is a sort of a, you believe that the other side, the person is true, may or may not be. And there is routing diversity. The data may go through multiple routes. So what are few vulnerabilities which you can see over here? Information gathering. What is information gathering? He's trying to gather information about a company. There's like we doing an audit without informing the client, or we doing some investigation or review without informing. So try to take all information from various places. Or you may also try to see, if I know that fellow's IP address, try to attack that IP address, see what are the details. Program for a particular IP address, what is the address they have, how do I respond to messages, etc. Then you have the social engineering technique. Social skills, personal skills, all these things. Then reconnaissance, gathering discrete bits of pieces of information from various sources and putting them together. Examination asked question, this entire slide. Operating system and application fingerprinting to identify which operating system they're using, what applications they're using, whether that application is outdated or not. If it is outdated, can I launch an attack based on that? Then bulletin boards and charts. Are they publishing certain things, or are they publishing in certain social media where something accidental is being published? There's been many cases where some people from the organization, they use the same organization username password to log into social media. So something gets leaked, everything goes for a toss. Then they have malware like virus, worms, etc. All these things they can attack. So what are types of attacks? Wiretapping, listening to a private conversation. This is just a classical example where there is some conversation you go and listen. Eavesdropping, which is nothing but signal tapping, wireless, optical fiber cable, all these are variants. Then you have war dialing. War dialing is continuously keep on making calls. One call will connect, start abusing or start get this information, etc. Man in the middle attack. Two people are conversing, in between this fellow comes and sort of, copies the data, tries to mention, after authentication is over, this fellow comes in. So he tries to say that, I am only so-and-so, receive all the money. Impersonation, session hijacking. This is where the attacker intercepts the entire session. So you have activated a session and you are doing it, but just before you make the ultimate payment, some modification he does. Message confidentiality threats, misdelivery, it goes to somebody else. Exposure, that message gets exposed to anybody else. Traffic analysis, again, this is a detective control or surveillance control, etc. Then you have message integrity threats. Integrity is anything which compromises the quality of the data. Some or all the content of the message gets replaced. You may have to reuse the old message. You need to combine pieces of different messages and create one message. So like there's a lot of issues could be created. Redirecting a message, destroying a message, etc. Website defacement, this we have been noticing in the recent past. Hackers just go visit that fellow's website and say, this website down, this Jinjabad or something like that, and just try to pull down. So defacement is common, not only because of its visibility, but also because of the ease at which it can be typically done. It's not very complicated to bring down a website. Then you have your DOS attack, which is your denial of service attack. Denial of service is basically an attempt to compromise, or you are trying to access multiple resources and I'm preventing you from accessing those resources. That's called as a denial of service attack. It causes legitimate users, they will not be able to work, etc. Okay, so you have a victim and you have a hacker. So he's basically using these computers to attack this one. Now, this could also be a distributed denial of service attack where multiple computers are there and this fellow has the control over it. So in denial of service, you have again 3 to 4 types: connection flooding, ping of death. All these are variants of it. Then you have distributed DDoS, which I just spoke about. Not one fellow, but multiple fellows are actually trying to attack. Then you have cookies. Cookies are temporary files created within the browser and they can store them data. This is used to improvise your experience. Okay, so what they do is next time they try to, intercept the cookie so that a wrong cookie gets stored and some information of yours you can sort of steal it. Then active code, which is nothing but, in those of you who filed your MCA returns earlier, you would remember this active code, ActiveX, etc. These are basically visual, how do I probably put it? VBS scripts, Visual Basic scripts. Okay, all these scripts, and these are basically, it creates an applet, a Java applet. So the moment you click, one small icon will come and say that you have to upload it, etc. So these again have some sort of a risk. In MCA, we were using it until few years. I think only last 2 or 3 years they've relaxed it. They've gone for an upgraded technology. Now, what are the controls you can deploy? Your virus signatures have to be regularly updated. Your antivirus alerts, you have to analyze what was the problem. How did that attack happen? Was it a pen drive? Was it an email accidentally took place? Schedule scans should be regularly performed. Then you have APT. APT are basically advanced persistent threats. They are targeted threats, which is again a malware basically. What they do is they send small bits of information from system to the attacker without getting detected by the overall network. So it's fairly advanced and it's a persistent. It keeps on trying to introduce and keeps on taking information away from the system. Then you have few other types like SQL injection. SQL injection is when there is a command which the programmer has written. You go in between the command and insert some malicious line. The moment you insert a malicious line, what happens? That actually takes a boost. Then you have broken authentication when attackers try to compromise the password or session key, etc. There is some conversation. They try to break open the session, and through which you try to get access of the session keys. Cross-site scripting, again, where untrusted data is being used, this could be an issue. Then you also have CSRF, which is cross-site request forgery. Again, HTTP is compromised. You try to take that fellow's access, etc. You have network security. Again, all these are the measures. The architecture, the encryption. Encryption is very critical. Encryption is either for authentication. We use a SSH, chapter number 1, we spoke about it, or SSL, Secure Socket Layer, the entire layer. Link encryption, end-to-end encryption. Example, a WhatsApp conversation is end-to-end encrypted. Zoom says they're end-to-end encrypted. I'm not too sure. I remember recently when conversation I said Zoom itself said they're not end-to-end encrypted. So all these are questions which will come up. Then you have PKN certificate, public key and private key, where basically these digital signatures are used to sort of protect, or maybe if I have to use that to ensure the authenticity and integrity of the data is taken care. Yeah, SSL, I think I spoke about. IPsec, encrypted emails are also there, so that email cannot be opened by any person other than the intended person, and they are encrypted. So even if they are sent across, there's not much of a damage. Then error correcting codes. These are all parity checks. These are all things done to rectify the error when they are being transmitted. So what happens? A parity check is an additional. It's like a check digit. Now one extra digit is added when the transmission takes place, and on the receiving side that digit is removed, whether it makes a proper sense or not. Checksum is basically sum of the correct digits is stored and transmitted. So it's basically every alphabet converted into sort of a numerical format, where the number calculated from here and there, it will sort of cross verify, and this can also happen on a cyclical pattern, that is a CRC. Then you have a message digest. There's nothing but an MD or a cryptographic checksum. The same checksum which is encrypted again using a hashing algorithm. Not to forget, we have firewalls, intranet, extranet, all of those we spoke about it. Then we also have the intrusion detection system. I think we covered it in the first chapter. I'm not spending too much time. Your IDS is of 2 types, host-based and network. Host means it will be in my computer or your computer. Network means it will be in the firewall level or at the Wi-Fi level, etc. It will monitor throughout the network. And how do I monitor the controls? You need to detect attacks and malwares, enhance the incident capability, detect APTs, advanced persistent threats, and compliance requirements. So all these things are critical things. A few other things: for wireless environment, encryption is mandatory. If you go to your Wi-Fi settings, you will find WPA2 encryption. Okay, then you have signal hiding techniques. In case you don't want to make your Wi-Fi available, visible, you can always have the Wi-Fi, but you can hide the signal name. Antivirus and anti-spy software. Default passwords have to be changed, and you can probably give a restriction that only those people whose MAC ID have configured in the Wi-Fi, they can access. So this will give you additional layer of security. So anybody who comes to your office cannot access it. only those people whose MAC ID, and what is MAC ID? Media access control or physical address or a laptop address or computer address, only those people can access. Last is your VoIP, voice over protocol. I think we spoke about basically internet calls. Then you have what is called penetration testing. Penetration testing is the process by which you penetrate into the network and try to make an attack. And this is done with the permission of the user. Why? This is nothing but ethical hacking to identify and exploit the various vulnerabilities. So you can do an external, internal, or you can also do a targeted. So few things, risk associated with penetration testing. Penetration testing, if they fail to identify, then it's a problem. And this testing activity should not trigger something bad. So it should immediately give some heads up. Or even if it is identified some issue, it should notify it separately. Then you have auditing network security, logical access, all these principles what we spoke about is what they've covered. VPN, encryption, all these things are what is covered there. Okay, so that brings us to the end as far as this network or chapter 4 is concerned. So chapter 4 again, a very important, a critical and fairly a large chapter, 20 marks, good combination of technology questions, and you can expect some amount of audit based questions also, and this is critical from a examination standpoint. Okay, so with this